Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very special night, a very important night, and I think as Tom Horn and I have experienced over the last years, we've been doing radio interviews together and writing both together and apart. We find that the timing that the Lord places us on the radio is usually at a turning point in history. Now, Tom and Chris Putnam has just come out with their new book, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here. Chapter 17 is posted on Tom's website, RaidersNewsUpdate.com, and I think everyone should absolutely be impressed with the lateness of the hour, because this is stuff that everyone has been teaching for literally over 100 years. Obviously, in modern Christendom, everybody waited for the appointed time. It's the appointed time, and I want Tom to have maximum time tonight. When you're going to send your questions, you can send them in to Bruce. Bruce can ask the questions of either Tom or myself, but please direct the ones about Petrus Romanus and everything to Tom Horn. Tonight we're going to hit the Vatican. The first hour we're going to hit the Vatican and alien disclosure. Tom sent me an email, and based on Donna's response, that's where the interest lies, and we'll, as usual, all gain an infinite new understanding of this amazing research and what we're going to basically be looking forward to in the very short period. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Steve. Great to be back on the show with you guys again. Always my absolute pleasure. It humbles me to get to be with great minds like yourself and to be able to have these conversations concerning the Vatican, the alien connection, what, if anything, it has to do with the arrival of Petrus Romanus. And you're right, and Donna was right. And I would say probably at least 10 to 1, Steve, and we got a lot of follow-up email following that last show that we did when Chris Putnam was on with us, and 10 to 1, it had to be people wanting to know more about the sources that I was citing concerning the Vatican, and of course Donna had to create just kind of a copy and paste email to send to all those people that wanted to go for themselves and read those documents about the Vatican's position on ET and how that might change religion, and we'll be talking about all that tonight. I will give you an update. We heard just today that the books Petrus Romanus are shipping today, so we're hoping by or before the 15th that we will have those in the warehouse, in our local warehouse here in Missouri, as well as the 2 warehouses for the distributor. And this book has already broke all sales records, all previous sales records for our distributor on pre-sales of a book have been broken by this book, Petrus Romanus. And so that illustrates the interest around the world that people have right now, the questions they have, Steve, for the kind of issues that you are brave enough to tackle. The people are there that have the questions, want to know what's going on in the world.
Well, again, Tom, I think it's very telling and truly compelling that years ago, even discussion of aliens would have been relegated and delegated to the realm of deliverance and the rites of exorcism. Now it seems like what is absolutely mind-boggling in the years that you and I have been doing talk radio together, me interviewing you, the thing that's fascinating is the acceleration. Now, you know me, I like to go to the bottom line. Let's start out with the alien disclosure and how that's going to affect mainstream Catholics, because it's already a given that the Vatican has its own intelligence. They have their own telescopes. They know what's going on. They have been briefed. They're clued in. But how will they sell it, Tom Horn, to the faithful who, as I said, would basically consider this stuff of the devil? And, I want to address later, too, Tom, with you the fact that this good alien, bad alien thing, this is all playing out according to the Luciferians' plan for the ultimate deception. So can we get to that? You mind if we hit it that way first? We'll just deal with the Vatican's entire change of perspective. Go ahead, sir. The floor is yours.
And also, if we can, sometime tonight, let's give an update on the David Flynn collection. And I would even like, if possible, to quote some of David's research, because he touched on a lot of this material long before I did. In fact, David touched on a lot of this material long before a lot of us did. And I'd like to be able to honor him by making that point. Well, first of all, let me start out by talking about what's in the headlines this week. You probably have saw one of the headlines was Countdown to Discovery of Alien Life, Tens of Billions of Rocky Planets in Milky Way Habitable Zones. That was from the European Space Agency. And what they're talking about is how their HARPS Planet Finder, interesting name, huh? But their HARPS Planet Finder has proven to them within their own science that they're rocky planets, Earth-like planets, and planets that are not much bigger than Earth and that could host life are way more common in the habitable zones around faint red stars than what we ever believed before. In fact, the international team there in Europe estimates that there are tens of billions of planets just in the Milky Way galaxy, and probably hundreds, or at least 100, just inside the sun's immediate neighborhood. So now the odds of finding sentient, intelligent extraterrestrials just went into the stratosphere. And so now, of course, the scientific teams, the bodies, what they've got to try to determine is if they should try to send signals to some of these planets to make contact. There's some who believe that's not a very good idea. And if they get any kind of response, then in what ways should they maybe follow up with that? Well, on the heels of the European Space Agency's reports, there is a new article that's at Life Science tonight, Life Science, which I think is owned by Reuters. But in any case, it's posted over there tonight. We're going to post it at Raiders News Update tomorrow morning, and it's a feature article that's called "If We Discover Aliens, What's Our Protocol for Making Contact?" And there's some pretty amazing stuff in this article, in the sense that they're saying, first of all, they're saying it's conceivable now, based on these recent discoveries, that humans could very soon come in contact with aliens, and furthermore, that life may even exist on Mars. It may exist on Europa, a moon of Jupiter. Europa, appears to have an underground ocean. And there is an astronomer from Pennsylvania State University by the name of Jacob Misra, who they quote in that article, and he's saying that there could be sentient life living in the underground ocean on Jupiter. So does this sound like the no-mo to anybody but me? And other possibilities he talks about. He says intelligent extraterrestrial beings may have traveled from a distant star system, and they've taken up residence in our solar system. They might, in fact, he says, be living in underground bases on Mars or the moon. Well, as I'm reading this stuff, knowing this is, this is Reuters, this is Life Science, this is not weekly world news, right? It makes me go back to something I was thinking about earlier this year, and that is, what is the real purpose of Curiosity, the rover that houses the Mars Science Laboratory, that's halfway to Mars right now? In fact, Curiosity, I guess this last Sunday, April the 1st, reached a milestone in that it passed the halfway point. It's traveling at something like 10,000 miles an hour to the red planet. But it's going to spend 2 years analyzing Mars around its landing site, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's what we're being told. But then you get these people that are academics, and some of them are members of NASA's astrobiology team, and they come out with statements like that there could be sentient life already on Mars living in underground cabins. I mean, is this guy just a fruitcake? And if so, why is he, the spokesman for Life Science and Reuters News? Well, it's very interesting times that we're living in. And what does this have to do with Petrus Romanus? What does this have to do with the Vatican? I'll tell you something that I haven't talked about this on radio anywhere, Steve. But this, from the beginning, this has been one of the creepiest ideas surrounding the arrival of Petrus Romanus, the false prophet, and any possible connection to the alien agenda. And this came to me when we were doing this research. Was there, related to Malachi Martin's vow, that an occult ritual was performed in 1963 at the Vatican and Target Chapel in South Carolina, involving a woman for the purposes of pregnation, or possibly there was a young priest for the express purpose of instilling something within him or those priests that were there. But the whole purpose of it was to enthrone Lucifer over the Vatican, according to this Jesuit priest. And that all of that was connected in another book by Malachi Martin to a final conclave that would bring to the throne of Peter a pope under the control of Satan, the false prophet. And of course, according to the prophecy of the popes, the final conclave is the one following Benedict, which right now, according to the Vatican's own news sources, the College of Cardinals are preparing right now for the conclave that will elect his successor. But here's the creepy part of this, was in this ritual that Malachi Martin brought up. And if you read his books and his descriptions, there are parts of it that sound almost identical to alien abduction descriptions. You know how that some of the best researchers into the field of alien abduction have often made parallels to dark occultism, right?
Absolutely.
The rituals, the use of blood, the use of genetics, the use of menstrual fluids, the things that they do in occult black magic and in the black mass, and in some of Malachi's descriptions, sounds eerily like some of the same activity that happens in alien abduction phenomenon. And it came to me one day that the Vatican's interest right now in alien intelligence, and if you remember, who was it? Was it Balducci? It was one of the Catholics' own bishops some years ago who said that the Vatican was already in contact. Remember that?
Yes,
was already interacting. You remember who I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. And you and I spoke of that years ago on the radio. And it's my contention, Tom, just to basically parenthetically insert something into this. Look, they already are in contact. We already have them, not on Mars or the moon. And somebody said, well, you know, Steve, it's not very far if you can make it to the Mars from some exoplanet to jump into the Earth's atmosphere or jump into the Earth's oceans. And Tom, over the years that I have been on talk radio and even before that writing about this stuff, I can't tell you how many people I've personally talked to that have been in the most secret government programs, including Phil Schneider 5 days before he was murdered, a guy by the name of Tex Armstrong who absolutely validated everything that I'd ever been told, and multiple generals and multiple intel agents. But you know what the common thread was in all these guys? They said it was something so not what you'd expect from intergalactic or interplanetary visitors. He said the occult emanations. He even told me about one guy that was present at Dulce, the underground base at Dulce, who was a Christian, and when he saw some of these entities in person now, he rebuked them in Jesus' name under his breath. And listen, a general told me this, active duty, no, you know, friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. And they absolutely, the aliens demanded that no, this is interesting, Christians be present at Dulce when they cut their deal. And Dulce is just one of many alien hives that exist. So, saying all that, what I'm just saying is they're already, to amplify what you've said, look, they're already, they've met with the ambassadors. So the whole plan is, Tom, how do they, number one, as Catholics and as basically the keepers of the faith, how do they leak that into their believers? And obviously there are different Catholics, the old school Catholics versus the new school. So, and this isn't just a Catholic issue. This is a total deception of the whole world issue. So how are they going to do that, in your opinion? Because, look, they've already given us enough stuff. Isn't it amazing? You really think that they didn't know about all those planets that exist? You think they didn't know about Europa and they didn't know about the Martian caverns and all that stuff? We get to David Flynn. I mean, David Flynn wrote the premier piece on Cydonia, and that Jonathan Swift knew about Phobos and Deimos, and even the Russians talking about Phobos being artificial. All these things don't just go back to the invention of science fiction movies. They go back hundreds of years, and in the case we'll talk about later, in all the cave drawings and everything else on the aliens, the alien presence is absolutely astonishing, whether you go to the Australian outback or into Bryce Canyon, Utah, and you've got these petroglyphs, if you will, of guys in spacesuits and helmets, and they're usually 8 or 9 feet tall. So isn't it amazing now? I think what you've laid the best groundwork for, of anybody I've ever interviewed, is how everything both religious, financial, philosophical, theological. All these points are coming together at this time.
And don't you think that, given what we know, and also, I guess, what we could suspect, that there would be reason to imagine that if, in fact, the Bishop of Rome, who said they were years ago that they were already involved in contact, interacting with, if you read, again, I'm not going to stay on Malachi Martin, but if you read his books, he was making a very specific case that there was an incarnation that was set to occur that would, in the final conclave, bring about an individual who essentially is not just under the control of Satan. He could even be in some aspect, not like the Antichrist, but in some reality, kind of a Satan incarnate. In other words, something entirely different about him. And that came back to me when I got to thinking about how the best researchers into alien abduction note these occult rituals. And years ago I did research in which I discovered, first of all, that most of the Vatican's astronomers that are mostly interested, including the newest ones, by the way, that are mostly interested in the alien phenomenon, also are certified exorcists. Isn't that a strange formula?
Absolutely.
The guys who are most called or intrigued or whatever in dealing with demons happen to also be the very ones that want to be astronomers and make contact with this other intelligence. But in any case, I discovered a long time ago that the ancient records, if you go back, you look at the records of the incubus, the succubus, there was always this collecting of human sperm by these night visitors or fluids from women, and they would, depending on whether it was incubus or succubus, they'd use it to impregnate a female host or to have sex with a male host, and how that all of that ancient language is identical in many ways to the testimonies of those who claim contact, and sounds also very much like what Malachi Martin had said. There's another thing that we won't go into, but it has to do with the medieval stories about the devil's mark, and how, according to the ancient beliefs, the devil would mark his victims for identification, and his marks were, scratches on them from a talon, they believed back then. The little straight scars, odd spots, typically in their genitive areas, and same thing today. And what we now call alien abduction, we wouldn't call it the devil's mark, but you have the same kind of marks, the same kind of scratches. So something's been going on for a very long time, and it has an interest in creating. It has an interest in building a body or in altering a human body. And then, of course, the question is, for what purposes? Now, the Vatican's astronomers, so to get back on the European Space Agency and the Vatican, they're really excited about these developments, or at least now they can admit their excitement. And I don't know if you know who Daniel Sheehan is. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School. He's a professor of world politics or something at the University of California. But in the 1970s, he's a Jesuit, I think, and he was the general counsel to the United States Jesuit Office of Social Ministry in Washington, D.C. But what's important about him is that not only is he an intellectual, but he was a special consultant to the United States Congressional Research Office project on extraterrestrial intelligence that had been ordered and set up by President Jimmy Carter. I don't know if you recall that, but he was a special consultant to them for the Jesuits. And now, with what the Vatican's been saying, between Jose Funes and all these guys out there talking, he's writing quite a bit, and he's reminding people that it wasn't very long ago, a couple of years ago, when the Vatican actually called together a bunch of academics at the Vatican for consideration of the philosophical and the theological questions posed by the discovery of extraterrestrial life. You remember that? It was, I think, 2009, and the Pontifical Academy of Sciences there in Rome, Italy, they convened this 5-day conference. There was something like 30 world scientists that went there to the summer residence of Pope Benedict XVI's grounds, and they in the Pontifical Astronomical Observatory. I don't remember who all, but it was a conference that was called by the Vatican to ask astronomers and astrobiologists from the United States, France, Britain, Switzerland, Chile, to present to the Vatican's philosophers and theologians, and actually even just a number of the members of the Catholic hierarchy among the College of Cardinals, to have them to present to those members of the Catholic hierarchy what is the mounting evidence of the existence of sentient life on other planets outside of the solar system. Well, now that's what the public understood this meeting was all about. But what Sheehan is saying, and he would know, is that the principal purpose of the conference was to actually indoctrinate, help, adjust, introduce the leaders of the Catholic Church to prepare for the reality of extraterrestrial intelligence, technologically advanced, non-human, sentient civilization that is in the universe that evidently some in the Vatican were aware of, but many others were not. It's protected knowledge, right? You need above security clearance. The Vatican basically introduced what today in the U.S. we call above top secret security clearance. But at the conclusion of that Vatican conference, at the time, the Jesuit director of the Vatican Observatory, Father Jose Gabriel Funes, he convened a press conference, and I remembered it, but I didn't realize the coded language that he was used that has now been brought out by Daniel Sheehan, in which he said publicly, he had a press conference. It was an official press conference at the Vatican, and so whatever he said would be official language. It'd be approved by the Vatican. And he said the questions of life's origin and whether life exists elsewhere in the universe deserves serious attention and offers many philosophical and theological implications. Okay, well, that doesn't sound like much to start with, but that the term theology was raised as a topic that would need to be reconsidered as a result of this new knowledge of extraterrestrial intelligence was consistent with 1 year before that, when he was quoted in the official Vatican newspaper, you know, the what's it called, the El Osservatore or whatever it is, Romano, and he was quoted as saying that if other intelligent beings do exist elsewhere in our universe and they are discovered by us, then they too will have to be considered to be part of God's creation. Well, what Sheehan is saying is that on the face of it, that statement doesn't seem like an important event, but what is unbeknown to most of the non-Catholic world, at least, is that Funes' specific choice of words was a precise restatement, exact wording of a key aspect of the official Catholic Church's edict that was issued in 1277 by Bishop Tempier, the Bishop of Paris, in which the Catholic Church officially condemned St. Thomas Aquinas' theological proposition, I think it's proposition number 34, in which Aquinas had publicly asserted that the first cause, meaning God in Catholic theology, cannot possibly have created other worlds. That was officially condemned by the Catholic Church on the specific grounds that it would set limits on God's creative freedom and the idea that God might have other sentient creatures living in other places. Well, the precise words are those that were deliberately used by Father Funes in 2008. In other words, Funes was sending a specific message that the bulk of the world, guys like me, we would never catch what he had just done. But according to Daniel Sheehan, a Harvard Law School professor who's currently a professor of world politics at the University of California, and more specifically was the United States Jesuit of Office Social Ministry Council who worked with President Jimmy Carter on this subject matter. What he's saying is that Funes was sending a specific message that only Catholic scholars would get. Basically, the time is here. The time has arrived. So is he overstating the facts? I don't know. But to announce this new official policy of the Roman Catholic Church acknowledging the likelihood of the existence of extraterrestrial life elsewhere in the universe in 2009 seems really suspicious to me. The fact that the specific year 1277 Catholic edict that condemned the proposition of Thomas Aquinas that there couldn't be other worlds with intelligent life, that was used by church authorities, I don't know. I think he's right. I think there was something there, and now these words are pointing Catholic leadership to the idea that we've made contact with morally.
I think it's bigger than that, though, Tom. I truly do. Because in all of my conversations, and I'm talking 2 decades with people in the know, the whole plan is, and this is what the argument has been, will the Antichrist be a possessed human being, or will it be an alien with claims that they created even Jesus? There was, are you familiar with the term the aviary?
Yes.
Well, you remember their claims is they even have like the equivalent of the DROPA disc, DROPA discs, that would indicate that they have, if you will, their version of a video recording. And so I think it's this: how do they reconcile the God of the Bible and the aliens who are going to claim to be our, if you will, originators? In other words, first cause is, as to a Christian, obviously, and to those of us who believe that God literally spoke the worlds into existence. This was the issue that even Zacharias Sitchin wrestled with. He could never admit that the Anunnaki could be fallen angels or rebellious angels who were created by God with free moral choice, and yet all of his research, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it, was both historically accurate, uniquely, how should I say this, researched, and you could only draw one conclusion. So how is it that, what is your opinion, Tom, based on what you're studying now? We've got obviously the final pope coming on. We've got the false prophet mentioned in the book of Revelation. We've got the Antichrist, the beast. We've got all these different people. But how are they going to swing, 1.2 billion or however many Catholics there are, to embrace this idea that there's no really, the God of the Bible was just a metaphor for our alien benefactors? I think, panspermia is the order of the day.
Well, that, and also, of course, the world could be shocked into going along with. Imagine, that you've got suddenly an armada of ships as big as the ones in that movie Independence Day that are hovering over the major cities of the world. People are going to quickly turn to the government and to who they consider to be their religious leaders for advice, and they'll pretty much step into lockstep, I believe.
Well, that's the answer. Yeah, that is the answer, in my opinion, and I think that you've brought that up in times past. Now we've seen, you can go on YouTube and you can see all the triangular-shaped aircraft or spacecraft that the Skunk Works has designed. And I want to give you a quote because I think it's so important that people understand this. Lockheed Skunk Works is the U.S. government contractor, big-time defense contractor that's had their secret stuff in the background developing it since Roswell. Reverse engineering alien stuff that's been found all over the world, and I've had special operations guys tell me that the focus and the maximum effort is spent in black projects is acquiring ancient technology and alien technology. So here's a quote. I know you've read this before, but he says, quote, "The former head, Ben Rich of Skunkworks, we already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects and would take an active God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." Now, this is the guy that was head of the most top secret, most, if you will, alien when I say alien technology was their forte, reverse engineering it. And interestingly enough, that was he died, I think, at the age of 69, and he died very shortly after coming clean with that. By the way, there's a video on YouTube of that entire speech. So given the fact that you said something critical, Tom, we're going to be shocked into it. YouTube's now showing base ships of horrific size that are basically drawing drawing their energy from the sun. NASA's stopping all of their video footage when anything of, let's say, this extraterrestrial origin shows up. And then we've got the Planet X block up. But all this stuff, here's what I want to say. I want to bring it into what you're talking about. Petrus Romanus, whoever is, and you're going to share that with who you guys think it is, but he's already prepped and knows all this stuff. And if it's so, how should I say this, so time sensitive as you and Chris have put in your book, then I think everybody who's listening to this show worldwide had better get that, because they can actually follow the steps and the thinking then that with every new press release, it's like Tom Horn gets a new key to the mystery. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, and the keys to the mysteries are coming so quickly now that it's almost impossible to keep up with everything that's happening. I mean, just on the one subject alone of what's going on in Rome right now, what's going on at the Vatican. If you watch Raiders News Update, we've hardly had space on the website to include any news other than what's coming out of Rome. And by the way, that includes tomorrow morning as well. There are two of the Vatican's theologians that have come forth now. They've published two different books. One's called The Pope's War. The other is called Obedience and Freedom. They're both in Italian, but you'll see the English story about those books at Raiders News Update tomorrow. And the headline is from Vatican Insider, so it's one of the most well-respected, thoroughly researched agencies that cover news on Rome. And the name of the article is "When the Church Plots Against Itself." And there's a theologian for the church by the name of Matthew Fox. He's a former Dominican. And he says that Pope Benedict XVI is the primary author of a plot against the church to systematically destroy the freedom of the faithful and enslave them to the magisterium. What he's saying is really important, because his point is that both when he was Cardinal Ratzinger and also since he's been the Pope, in these secret, whatever they have, these rulings inside the Vatican where they rule for or against particular kinds of theological positions, he has consistently ruled against the theologians who are in support of changes to the church since the Vatican II Reformation. So again, we're not going to talk about that tonight, but that came up in the first show, that there is something very mysterious involving Vatican II that is involved in what's going on in Rome right now. And now for the first time we find out that, according at least to this one Dominican theologian, that Pope Benedict is right in the middle of ruling against the theologians who are for Vatican II, which means that there is a movement to try to restore some of the pre-Vatican II authoritarianism, and that is very much in line with what many of the Catholic scholars believe is implied by the name Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, that he will want to restore the original Roman authorities of the Catholic Church, which means the Catholic Church will be the universal church under the empire of Antichrist, and you're part of it or you're probably dead. So that's the implication from it. There's a second priest right now, and his is the one that's called Obedience and Freedom. Anyway, you can read all about it tomorrow. But so there's so much amazing stuff that's coming out of Rome right now, we can hardly keep up with it, and also report other things that I'm very interested in, like transhumanism, eugenics, what's happening in the genetics revolution, what's happening in prophecy in general, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening with changes to the earth. It is a rapid fire. Well, when the Bible says that the time would come when the earth would literally reel to and fro, I mean, I had no idea that it would be such an explosion, such an acceleration, as Daniel said, of knowledge that people would be running to and fro. You can hardly keep up with it. Well, back to the question. That Funes said that that official disclosure of aliens was going to raise theological questions. That brings us to the next question. and that in what way will the Vatican, according to Funes and others, in what way will they suggest that our religious beliefs are going to have to be moderated, and evidently fairly soon, based on the disclosure or the revealing of alien intelligence? And there was something I did, and I invited you to be part of it a couple of years ago, Stephen. I don't remember why, but you couldn't be. But if you recall, in January of 2010, the Royal Society, the National Academy of Sciences out of the United Kingdom, they hosted representatives from NASA, the European Space Agency, the United Nations, the Office of Space Affairs from the United Nations. Anyway, it was their 350th anniversary celebration. And what they chose on their 350th anniversary to discuss was the detection of extraterrestrial life and the consequences for science and society. And if you recall, at the time, Lord Martin Rees, who is the president of the Royal Society, but he's also the astronomer royal, he's the one that whispers all the esoteric information into the Queen's ear, he announced that aliens could be staring us in the face in a form that humans are completely unable to recognize. Now, talk about how you could write a book. What was he talking about? And what we did at the time was, we wound up with 20 hours of interviews, and we interviewed everybody from Jesse Marcel to the original investigators of the Roswell event, to theologians, to Chuck Missler. And like I said, I invited you, and I don't recall what it was, but I think you were visiting with your daughter maybe or something in California or something. But in any case, what does he mean? They're staring us in the face in a form that humans are unable to recognize. Now, I asked that question, by the way, of James Hughes, who was the World Transhumanist Association leader. He's now the leader of the IEET, which is the #1 think tank online for the transhumanist community, what he thought it meant. And, he went into all kinds of stuff about, there could be microbial intelligence that we think is dirt, and it's monitoring us. So he went into stuff like that. But what came back to my mind is, what if they're already here? They're already walking among us, and the reason we wouldn't recognize them is because they look exactly like us. Now, that's very strange. Some people would reject that entirely, but I wondered if that wasn't the astronomer royal's way of saying what he, in fact, believed. In any case, out of that whole 350th anniversary, and there was Nick Pope, we interviewed him, but he was also there during the hearings there at the Academy of Science in the UK. They use language like, we have overwhelming evidence, we have unprecedented proof. I mean, all kinds of loaded language like that to suggest how close they believed we were to making disclosure of intelligent alien life. Well, that was only in 2010. It was only 1 year after the Vatican invited all of those scientists, 30 scientists from different countries, to come to the Vatican to explain to their bishops what would be the impact on society, including the religious ideas. You had Simon Conway Morris, who's a professor of evolutionary paleobiology at Cambridge University. He was at the National Academy of Science, and he was the most worried guy there, talking about the unknown unknowns and how it might not be a good thing, and basically repeating something I heard Steve Quayle one time say, that these things might come here and think we look like a pretty good lunch. Stephen Hawking. So anyway, everybody was there, but it also included spokespeople for the Vatican, and once again, Father Jose Gabriel Funes, and he gives this long interview with the Osservatore Romano newspaper, where he's weighing in on the question, are we alone in the universe? And he stated at the time that we are at a time now where there is a certain possibility, in fact, the chances are more likely than not, of intelligent life in the cosmos, and that nation, you remember when he said that notion would not contradict our faith.
Yes.
Again, what does he mean by that? Because definitely there are some people on the earth that the notion of intelligent life that is morally closer to God, morally superior to us, in the sense that they're not fallen and we are, that would definitely tinker with somebody's faith. There's a lot of people on the earth that are Christians, and it absolutely would contradict their faith. So what's he talking about? There is a kind of new faith that is coming, and it responds to the question of whether extraterrestrials would need to be redeemed or whether we would need to be evangelized by them. And that is becoming the common thread amidst much of the new theological discourse that is coming out of the highest levels of the authorities there in Rome that do work at the observatories and speak to the issue of astrobiology. Funes himself said, his explanation was, God was made man in Jesus to save us, but other intelligent beings may exist, and it's never been said that they would need redemption. In fact, they're in full friendship with their Creator, and by full friendship, he was again repeating how in the Vatican, the theologians now are accepting the possibility that an extraterrestrial species, I want to say exists, they put the word may exist on it, but that it is morally superior to man, closer to God than we are, and that as a consequence, they're coming. And when they come, they're going to evangelize us. In other words, they're going to better instruct us in our faith, and that's the reason why, going back over all these years, you keep hearing that redundant statement from guys like Funes and others from the Vatican who are saying, when disclosure is made, theology is going to have to be reconsidered. I don't know if I ever sent it to you, but 3 or 4, maybe it's been longer than that. I guess it's been maybe 8 or 9 years ago. Time is getting past me now in my old age. But Guy Consolmagno, he wrote his Brother Astronomer, Adventures of a Vatican Scientist, and I think I sent it to you.
Yeah, and we've talked about that over the years. You know, we really addressed that because Cosmologno basically told everybody what was going on, in my opinion.
Well, and then on the last show, and this was what we got so much email on, is the paper that was written this last year by the Interdisciplinary what was published actually in the Interdisciplinary Encyclopedia of Religion and Science, but it was written by Father Giuseppe Tanzella-Niti, and he's a member of the Pontifical University in Rome, so he's a member of the Vatican's deepest theological discoursers. And he explains in that article how mankind is going to be evangelized during contact with spiritual aliens, and every believer in God needs to prepare for it, he argues, because we are going to greet extraterrestrial civilization evidently pretty soon. We're going to admit they're extraordinarily advanced beyond us, more intelligent, more moral, whatever. And according to him, contact with these non-extraterrestrial intelligences are going to change our understanding between the relationship that we have with God and the whole idea of the gospel and Christianity and creation, and that when they arrive, it is not going to immediately oblige Christians to have to renounce their faith in God, but that very soon the renunciation will come because they're going to present religious content. Now, what does that mean again? You said a moment ago they've got their own Dropa stone. They've got what? Some kind of high-tech type video that depicts Christ. And what's Jesus going to tell us? I'm an alien. These are my brothers. They're here. Who knows what any of that could possibly mean? But what Tanzella-Niti says is that once the trustworthiness of the information is verified, what does that mean? How could we verify the trustworthiness of information that is brought to us from an extraterrestrial intelligence? Why in the world is a guy who is part of the Pontifical University in Rome talking about this, and why is it being published in the Interdisciplinary Encyclopedia of Religion and Science? We're talking here, folks, about peer-reviewed information, as it were. So these are not Johnny-come-latelys. What in the world is it that they're trying to say? What is it that they're trying to prepare mankind for? In what way could you verify that extraterrestrial information is true or not true? But in any case, he says once it has been verified, then Christians are going to have to reconduct a rereading of the gospel inclusive of the new data, and it's going to change our beliefs about God. So that was, I think I said more about that in the last show than I'm saying right now, because I don't want to just repeat a bunch of information, but that was the point on which we got the most email, and Donna had to send that link to a gazillion people out there that could hardly believe that that's the position of the Vatican, but it is. And so how is this more complete ET gospel going to de-emphasize or significantly modify our understanding of salvation through Jesus Christ? I don't know, but he's just one of the spokesmen. There's a former Vatican Observatory Vice Director, Christopher Corbali, and he wrote an article following up on this one called "What If There Were Other Inhabited Worlds?" and he concludes that Jesus simply will not remain the only word of salvation. That's his words. He says that we're going to try. We'll explore the alien. We'll let it be whatever it is without rushing into classification categories. We're not going to be mean to it. So this would very much fall into, I guess, Obama strategy. But then he drops a bombshell, which I printed and put on my board in front of me. And here's what it says. While Christ is the first and the last word, the Alpha and Omega spoken to humanity, he's not necessarily the only word spoke to the universe. For the word spoken to us does not seem to exclude an equivalent word spoken to aliens. They too could have had their Logos event, whatever that event might have been. It does not have to be a repeat death and resurrection. If we allow God more imagination than some religious thinkers seem to have had, he must be talking about Tom Horn and Steve Quayle. For God, as omnipotent, is not restricted to one form of language, the human, end quote. So the language couldn't be more explosive, and it couldn't be more conspiratorial in the purest sense of the word.
I think that people had better realize, too, something. The idea that God created mankind in his image and likeness, the Bible declares that Jesus didn't die for the angels. In the book of Enoch and some of the extra-biblical texts, we see the pleading of the fallen angels, especially those in Tartarus, whether they're the Grigori, G-R-E-G-O-R-I, or the Chalkidri. The thing is, that's fascinating because, again, I tell people this, the idea of mankind was something so astonishingly marvelous that even a third of the angels that rebelled with Lucifer were jealous. In other words, what is man that thou art mindful of him, the psalmist asks. So what I would say, and I would love to get, and I really mean this, get into it with those type of statements is this, truly God is infinite. He's omniscient. He's omnipotent. All the attributes that God is, he is. But he, in his self-revealing mode, has said, this is who my son, and if you read the entire Gospels, you know this, we all know this as Christians, that through him, by him, and in him, Colossians 1:16 and 17, does everything exist or consist that is in existence. So, in other words, the worlds were spoken into existence, but mankind was something so unique that all the angels were commanded not to worship man, but to worship the handiwork of a living God. And about a third of them said, not on your life. And so when you and I, Tom Horn, talk about transhumanism, and it's interesting. In other words, the very argument of transhumanism underscores our response to that, quote, guy that's taking pot shots at us. And the point is to say, look, you can't use circular logic claiming God's omnipotent, all-powerful, and certainly not limited, but if the Lord himself limits his dealings with this specific group of humanity, why are these fallen angels, which are obviously more powerful, all this stuff, why are they so interested in tampering with us sexually? And that's what gets into the fall of the angels, the daughters of men, the whole Genesis 6 thing. And then, as you have stated so many times, Tom, and this is all involved in this, that people have got to understand that deception is going to be so great, the arguments are going to be so compelling, the evidence is going to be so demonstrated, and then the power, Jesus himself said, that the evil one will be able to call fire down from heaven. No offense, he just did it in Texas, and nobody, very few people realize that the entire Texas tornado thing, 12, total weather warfare. And again, what's so interesting to me, Tom, is notice this. Notice when you and I first started talking on the radio, a decade or so ago, and what was, they used to boo-hoo us or poo-poo us, I guess more poo-poo, whatever they used to do with it. They used to complain a lot. The idea is now is so much of what we brought out, and we were called crazy, all these different, well, crazy was the nicest stuff. But now people have to deal with the complete, quote, singularity. And I believe the singularity is nothing more than the alien influence. Look, I really do believe that it's not the World Weekly News, but I believe that we already have cohesion and groups working with aliens that look like us, shape-shifting, okay? Even in the Lost Books of Eden, I'll throw something out here that most people don't understand. The Lost Books of Eden and the writings attributed to Adam, look, I think some people think that Adam was just some illiterate hick that didn't know how to read or write. If the guy could name every single thing just by nature, Adam was tuned into the mind of God. So instantly, if you would, he shared in the marvelous omnipotence of God as God allowed him to. I mean, if somebody's being created in the image of God, God's not going to say, listen, I limit your IQ to 150 and because I don't want to feel threatened. Saying that is that we've got this marvelous picture of initial creation, the tampering with creation, the redemption, and the soon coming of the Lord to resurrect us. Now, Jesus did say something pretty important. He said, if it were possible, even the elect would be deceived. And I can tell you this, the average, and I'm saying this, the average smug Christian cannot even defend his belief in any attack by, quote, the intellectuals. Now, Stephen Hawking, okay, bright guy. I would like to see literally him get saved and come to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. I'm serious about that. But, now they're just talking about they want to, you put it on your website, they want to basically download Hawking's brain to see what made him tick. And the elements that we're dealing with now, we're talking about, if you will, a data dump on the entire population of the world. We're seeing visual imagery and massive UFO sightings. The coming of Planet X, Nibiru, the 10th planet, Gabriel's 5th. We're seeing the upheavals and everything. And I can just tell you this, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that in the geologic realm, the geologic equivalent of Hegel, the dialectic would be you generate earthquakes, you generate volcanoes, and all of a sudden you just flip your fingers, snap your fingers, and then obviously somebody's turning off what's causing that stuff to happen. And you just wowed most of the planet. So the technology, the singularity, all these things we're talking about, Tom, ultimately, and this is what David Flynn did, and maybe in the next hour, we're just about at the top of this hour, we can talk about some of the amazing realities. I talked to Mark, David's twin brother, and I said, Mark, I prayed about the situation. It broke my heart. I'm saddened. It's just a great loss, and I mean a great loss, of one of the most beautiful men that I've ever met in my life, and also, in my opinion, and I know you share this, a man whose mind was really beyond most of our ability. It was his graciousness that brought us into his realm. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I fear God too much to flatter any man. But as Tom will tell you, and I will tell you, there was something so heavenly gifted to that man. And I've heard so many criticisms, and these are my words, and I'm serious, of how should I say this, mentally challenged individuals who could not come up with a basic formula for baby soup or whatever, baby formula, ingredients for baby formula, taking this guy on. And Tom, you brought up a wonderful statement to me on the phone and through emails that he's probably the most ripped off guy that's ever written anything, and people have built entire books never giving him attribution. And it's not that he would have wanted or even cared so much, but it's that they're deriving the wrong they're using his data and coming up with some new age or bizarre thing that he never met. And David stayed true to the Scripture. He stayed true to his God. He absolutely loved Jesus. And ladies and gentlemen, I would sit with him for hours, and he would blow my mind, but he was in another dimension. I believe that the Lord took him home because at that point, I believe God said, David, your work on earth is done. Come up yonder or come up hither. And I'm not saying that to rationalize, what is the hard thing about losing a loved one. I'm just telling you, ladies and gentlemen, he was a gift to the church. Newton was considered the father of modern science. There has been nobody like him yet, and yet God in his majesty chose to give David Flynn the understanding of the code that had escaped Newton. Newton was there. He postulated about it. It really bothered him, but it was sealed up, Tom. And now I think the things that you're talking about and you're writing about and we're talking about are those things that Daniel probably saw in Technicolor, but they were sealed up until the time of their introduction. And I think that's why we're on, whatever is the date today, the 4th of April, and we're telling people, because I've noticed this, that when God puts us on, it's usually to have pre-countered some really disturbing information that's going to come out there. And, we'll get our flack that we're just, I love it, barbaric, locked in a barbarous religious time. Well, I don't think there's so much about barbarous, but I can tell you this, the future that they're promising, it may be sugar-coated, but it's like swallowing a milkshake with razor blades, that each razor blade then turns on some nanomotor and just devours you from the inside. So saying all that to say is that David talked about what you are talking about now. Obviously, he knew what was coming. And, you want to just address that? We've got about 5 minutes because or we can go into the next hour without even stopping. But I think that people don't understand. You published Temple at the Center of Time. You published some of the most concise and insightful essays, which, by the way, are going to be in his anthology. Just absolutely, as his publisher, as his friend, and as someone who was equally amazed at his God-given genius, you've got to sometimes shake your head when you see everybody and their dog. And I'm telling you, some of these people that have ripped him up, they should have flea collars and they should repent. But the point is, those are my statements. Don't get mad at Tom for those. The point is that and forgive me, and I know that we were graced with an extraordinary individual given supernatural revelation from the throne. And it's almost like where David left this earth at that point, it was not yet time to go the next step. I'm convinced he knew some stuff, and he was waiting for the right time, and God said, David, it's not time. Come home, That's the only thing I know in my spirit.
Well, you've raised actually several things I'd like to respond to, but let's go to the break, and after the break, if I can have permission to do so, I'd like to respond to a couple of things. David Flynn, but also some of the stuff that you were talking about, some of these mental midgets that are operating at full steam right now, that are highly critical of people like you, me, David Flynn, Chuck Missler, any of the rest of us that are out there trying to open the world's eyes.
Gentlemen, before we take this break, folks, if you're just tuning in, this is episode 622. We've got Steve Quayle and Tom Horn tonight as our special guest. And, gentlemen, I'd like you to give out your contact information and tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of me is just a Raiders News Update at gmail.com. The website, of course, is raidersnewsupdate.com.
And, Tom, the new book, Petrus Romanus?
Yeah, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here. Of course, you can get it anywhere, but I want people to know, maybe we'll have a chance to say something about this. On the 24th, or is it the 23rd? Yeah, maybe the 23rd of April, we're going to give away a huge library on DVD. And this is everything from ebooks to audio files to movies to huge libraries, actually, of books. But we made a deal between us and Survivor Mall where we're going to be giving that away free if people buy that book from Survivor Mall. But they can get it anywhere. It'll be in bookstores. It'll be at Amazon. The name's Petrus Romanus. The Final Pope is Here. But know that if you see all that big advertising, and actually there's an ad on the front of Steve Quayle's website right now, too, that's advertising. You click on it, you go to that website. Just know that when you see all of that free material, you're not going to receive that if you buy the book at Amazon. Now, as a publisher, I don't care where you buy it because it's from my distributor anyway. But that one option for the free libraries, that's from Survivor Mall only. That's their deal.
All right, and Steve?
Well, I think, first of all, everyone should take advantage of this because when you buy from Survival Mall, I don't think that you could go out, the average person cannot go out and do what Tom has done, or even I've done, in the time we've been at it. Look, Tom's been at this a long time. I've been at it. But when you go and order Petrus Romanus from Survivor Mall, you're going to get the audio, video files, and dozens of PDF books. And the point is, I'm telling you, this is a work. How do I say this? It's precept upon precept. We're trying to provide everyone a foundation to understand the eternal ramifications of even seemingly harmless news articles, or something says, that's just all that crazy stuff about the Vatican, or all that's crazy Tom Horn and Steve Quayle about giants. The bottom line is we're sharing with you the fruit of our labor and investigations, because most of you simply cannot do it. So I would encourage everyone to take advantage to that, the giveaway that Tom has offered. I mean, Tom, when you put out just your researcher's library and sent me a copy, by the way, thank you very much, that was something I want to do. Well, I got to tell you something. My drawer of good ideas gets higher and higher. I just don't have the time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to share something. What Tom has done is given you so much foundation that then the scriptures, as you read them, and as God puts his time keys into everything, it's like a combination to a safe. You got to go a little left, a little right, a little left, and finally turn to the right and flip the lever to open it. Most of the safes. The idea is that you have to understand to apply yourself, because and here's the thing: if everyone listening to this show would become more studious and student-like, instead of sitting and I know, Bruce, you have a chat room, and I'm not a fan of those, but you got them, and that's okay. But the point is, asking and I say this to those asking who has no clue, no understanding, no depth, no history, and no walk or any type of reference point to even discuss this, what he thinks, and somebody says, I think Horn is crazy and Quayle's crazier, well, thank you very much, but that's about as dumb a ad hominem attack as you can get. What we're trying to say is this: apathy, indifference, and just a general I don't care attitude, those are going to kill you. But if you'll just make the effort, and I think that this is such an amazing book, amazing offer. Look, it's critical, it's pertinent, it's time. It doesn't get any plainer than that. Now, saying that, I want everyone to understand something, that Angel Wars plays into this, because the book Angel Wars that I think is just the best presentation of all of the spiritual deception out there. The first part of it, the first half of it, is basically antiquity, myth, legends. The second half is transhumanism, singularity. The whole idea, the simple idea is this: is Satan is promising humanity a judgment-free future, eternal life, eternal pleasure. When your body gets old, you just basically download your subconscious, and then even be going on that, you can share someone else's wonderful sexual experiences for a price. Tom, I remember talking about sex bots over 15 years ago on talk radio. People thought I was crazy. You just posted on Raiders the other day that now they've got artificial skin that can bleed and heal itself. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're in the termination, and where the Terminator wasn't just a movie, and you and I both, Tom, have said over and over and over that the movies are preconditioning you for acceptance, or they initially try and say, oh, that's just that crazy science fiction stuff. Well, when you find out that the Gene Roddenberry of Star Trek fame was an active CIA agent, you find out how many scripts don't come out of the writer's mind before they come through Langley. And then I just quoted to you Ben Rich's statement. Anything you can imagine they've already done. The idea is this, is that you, in their minds, the elite minds, is you're too dumb to live. And that's the alien idea, too. The egalitarian elitism of an intergalactic, I guess you'd say, predatory pervert that has to come to Earth and seduce Earth women to get their ovum, or to, basically rape men to get their sperm. I think the bottom line is this is not something that's just new to the science fiction genre. This is something that's been around for literally thousands and thousands of years, and then we can't talk about it tonight, but we're dealing with things that the Vatican Library and the secrets of the Vatican, trust me, if you see a National Geographic Secrets of the Vatican, you're not seeing the secrets. It's just like the Smithsonian trying to pass off every giant bone that's ever been found of a giant fallen angel human hybrid as being some dinosaur bone, or when they can't pull that one off, they have to come up with Gigantopithecus, the great ape, but then they can't explain, the little people they're just finding in Indonesia and other parts of the world. Well, the idea of this is this. You are being fed selective garbage, I'll use a nice term. You're given regurgitated vomit. You have the choice of hot, medium, and cold vomit, but nevertheless it's vomit in the mainstream. And what we're trying to do tonight is give you the meat. So the book Angel Wars is available only from my site, stevequayle.com, and you can go online and order it. And Weather Wars, which I wrote, Tom, I think I wrote that close to 10 years ago. Most didn't even believe in Weather Wars, and yet we see it. Dutchins and others are talking about this. So what we're doing tonight is we're giving the people a cornucopia of truth and tying it back into Petrus Romanus. The final pope is here. Now, let me make it easy for everybody. If the final pope is here, that means we are in the final countdown, not the end of the world, but the end of the age, which Jesus warned us about. And I find it interesting that the aliens will have to attack the person and the claims of Jesus Christ. And if they can't attack him, then they're going to have to claim they created him.
Gentlemen, with that, let's take about a 7-minute break, and then we're going to come back with part 2 tonight with Tom Horn and Steve Quill. We'll be back after these messages.
Hey, well, Tom, I think that if we could just take a few minutes and let's talk about our David Flynn anthology and just some of the stuff that you've watched, because, again, as his publisher, I don't think a more timely and important book was ever written than Temple at the Center of Time. And the thing is that you, of all people, have seen more stuff of David's probably ripped off than anybody else. And, I don't have a problem with, I put 900 footnotes or so in my book Angel Wars because I don't have the wherewithal to claim originality, all this stuff. But it's really a travesty and a tragedy that this kind of stuff happens. So just take it for a few minutes. First of all, let's go ahead and tell the people how close we are to having his anthology ready, for people to read, and also just kind of your thoughts on it as you have been acting kind of as editor-in-chief.
Steve, if I can, let me preface that first by saying something else, because when I start talking about David, we can take that and lead back into this whole conversation about the UFO and alien agenda, the Vatican agenda. But before we went to the break, you mentioned a couple of extra-biblical books, including the Book of Enoch, and scholarly research related to it. And I want to say something that's it's actually been in my craw for a few days. Is this okay?
Absolutely.
It's my position, it's your position, and this is the final time I'm ever going to say this, that the Bible, as we hold it today, and by the way, I still preach from an old King James version of the Bible, is the inerrant Word of God, and there is no other. That's an evangelical position that affirms that God in his wisdom preserves sacred scripture, unlike all of the books or collections of works in the world, and that it is free of doctrinal error, due to having been given by inspiration of God, is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works, says 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. It's also common evangelical scholarship that while no other text can claim that same unique authority, apocryphal and pseudepigraphical literature, such as I included in the Researcher's Library of Ancient Texts, such as you were referring to before we went to the break, the books of Enoch, Jasher, Jubilees, and so on, that these provide literature that often precedes or follows the chronology of biblical texts, and which are routinely used by biblical scholars as supplemental works within academic settings to help students of the Bible and history better understand cultural and historical context within the Word of God. In fact, I'll bet you that most pastors and Bible teachers that are listening to this radio show tonight have copies of the works of Josephus, for instance, to better understand the history and the wars of the Jews, because those types of ancient texts provide commentators valuable insight into what many ancient Jews and early Christians believed when God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, according to Hebrews 1:1. So in the same way that American history texts are not considered inspired scripture, but they help students in junior and high school understand our national history and our founding beliefs, these ancient extra-biblical books, often called apocrypha or pseudepigrapha, are valuable supplemental resources for assisting serious researchers and students in the study of the Bible and Bible times. For instance, the Book of Enoch is an ancient Jewish religious work. It is traditionally ascribed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. It's referred to, in fact, quoted in the New Testament in Jude 14:15. It's referred to in 1 Peter 3:19. In addition to that, the Book of Enoch was considered scripture in other ancient works, such as the Epistle of Barnabas. It was considered scripture by many of the early church fathers. We know that to be true with Athenagoras. We know it to be true with Clement of Alexandria, who was a close personal friend of the Apostle Paul. We know that to be true with Irenaeus. We know that to be true with Tertullian. Tertullian actually even wrote in the year 200 that the only reason that the Book of Enoch was rejected from the canon was because the Jews were offended by the fact that it specifically prophesied the coming of Jesus Christ. Furthermore, fragments of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that was one of the things that helped scholars verify its historicity. And the bottom line is, for 700 years following the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, the Book of Enoch and other books like it were highly respected. They were kept in churches, they were read in churches, and in many cases they were part of the canon. But in any case, no matter how many times we clarify that point, there is this narrow segment of churchianity today, and I'm not saying this for their benefit. I'm saying it for the benefit of those people out there who haven't made up their mind yet, and they're confused by these people. These people insist that believers stay stupid or face their wrath, such as that email that you shared with me last week while I was speaking at the Lakeland, Florida conference, and you sent me that email of a believer and his wife who were excommunicated by a megalomaniacal pastor and his zombie church followers for daring to listen to Steve Quayle and Tom Horn. Well, Steve, I think these people are described by Jude as actually connected to the prophecies from the Book of Enoch as end times tares, false Christians. Jude portrays them this way. He calls them clouds without water, carried about of winds, trees whose fruit withereth, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots, grumblers, malcontents, following their own sinful desires, who boast about themselves and flatter others to try to raise their own profile because they don't have the Spirit of Christ within them, so they latch on to Steve Quayle's audience or Tom Horton's audience, or they try to get us to get engaged in some kind of a debate so that they can raise their own profile. Well, I tell you what, Steve, you can tell this is irritating to me, and I'm not going to talk about it anymore, but I needed somewhere to vent this. I've never seen a time when the tares among the wheat are so agitated by the demons that are in control of their minds and spirits that they can't seem to fathom how they are actually the fulfillment of end times prophecy, and that just like Judas Iscariot, they have a role to play. They do. And they have a destiny to play out, and they are going to go to their own place in eternity, just as Acts 1:25 says Judas did. But what mostly seems to be enraging these poor simpletons is how they, like the Pharisees did with Jesus, can't control free, evangelical, anointed spokespersons like yourself, Gary Stearman, Chuck Missler, and others who are warning of the wrath that is to come, and they're telling people to prepare now, or at least to open their eyes to the conditions of the world. And I'll say one final thing, and then I'll get off this, because you can tell it's going to irritate me. Satan was once described as the Lord of the Flies. And just like flies, this waterless cloud society is out there buzzing louder than ever now, hoping that we'll become so preoccupied by swatting at them while they fly around our heads on the internet that we'll be unable to concentrate on the bigger, more serious issues facing mankind and the church today. But I, for one, have instructed my staff to blacklist every person that contacts us that way. Every person that emails us that way now goes into a spam filter, and they could send us 1,000 emails and we'll never even know they tried to contact us, because I refuse for myself or Raiders News Update to give another second of any of our time to those kind of people. And by the way, that's going to do nothing but infuriate them, and the flies are going to buzz even louder. And they are going to keep attacking us, by the way, for opening the church's eyes to what's happening now and what lies ahead, because this is our course in life, Steve. It's our calling until the Lord come, and just like Jesus said of such people, which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted and slain? If they could, they would us too, but they're not going to until God's done with us, and once he's done with us, we're going to go sit up there with David Flynn and talk about how this is all unfolding on the earth, right?
Amen. And, I was thinking about David and that, and I actually wrote that in my preface to Sidonia. Tom wrote a preface to Temple at the Center of Time. Just tell what's in the anthology, because Mark, David's twin brother, and ladies and gentlemen, I know him. I've spent time with him. Mark is an equally gifted man and equally humble, but let me just tell you something. These guys were absolutely two peas out of a genius pod. Now, I'm not flattering Mark either, but I can tell you this, that I'm personally tired of, and these are my words, okay, but Gene Scott said it well, okay? He said he is amazed. You remember when Gene Scott used to talk about pissants, okay? Now, pissant is an actual thing, okay? And he used to have a theme song. I've almost, a couple of times wanted to play his, but there you had another man who was ahead of his time. But let me just share this. I'm going to ditto and echo what Tom has just stated. The fact that these absolute, and now I'm going to just vent for about a minute. These people who have done nothing, they do nothing, they're anonymous, they don't even have the testicles or the cojones to come and use their real name, yet they go on all these boards. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're on the boards listening to this instead of studying to show yourselves approved unto God, shame on you. If you're too lazy to open your Bible, Tom wasn't, I wasn't. We are bringing to you life and death. And Tom, I got to tell you something. Never have I seen a group of people so bent on self-destruction. Never, ever. And I got to tell you something. I agree with my adversary and I've been personally mocked by some of those who've tried to bribe me and said, Steve, you're getting flack from the people you're trying to help. When you going to figure out they're not worth it? Now, how would you like to hear that from someone that 1 minute is trying to kill you, but the next minute they're offering you the olive leaf and a whole lot of millions of dollars just to shut up and go away? Well, my answer to that is this. I answer to Jesus. I answer to the brethren. I have men that I submit myself to. And, Tom, you and I have been at this a long time. And the spam filter, I have unfortunately answered, and I'm done doing that, okay? Somebody said you can hit the delete button. Well, sometimes when it comes in and it's got FU on it, it's too hard to delete, and I just want to see what the basis of this one is. But here it is. It's an orchestrated attack by the powers of hell to keep you from knowing the truth, because Jesus said, if you abide in him and his word abides in you, then ye shall know the truth, the truth shall set you free. The world uses ye shall know the truth shall set you free, and my immediate response when I hear someone who doesn't know Jesus say that is, liar, you're in bondage. You can't even know the truth, because without Jesus there is no truth. Quote the scripture, the whole world lieth in the evil one. So when I post the Book of Giants, which is also Dead Sea Scroll fragments, and I post it in all that its entirety, it's kind of like tiptoeing through the tulips with Twinkies. And when I say my definition of Twinkie isn't a little, one of those things like a chocolate pie or a little thing that Hostess used to make. I'm talking about Twinkies and spiritual dilettantes that have nothing better to do than basically they won't even challenge us on the scripture. They just basically, one group, I think one of the emails I sent you, the guy, I finally wrote him back and said, I want to know these guys' name. He wouldn't tell me so I could, go Matthew 18 with them. But, the point is that the nameless and the shameless. And Jesus said, and I'm going to share this, never in my life have I said anything to anybody to say, trust me. I've said, take it to the Lord in prayer. Tom and I spent a lot of money, put up with a lot of stuff, and especially like his house burning down and all of the threats he lives under, all the threats I live under. And, the point is that some of you who are adult Christian males, and God knows, Tom, the bravest men I know, and I mean this generally, with a few exceptions, the bravest men I know, or the defenders of the faith, are women of faith. I'm not talking busybodies. I'm not talking Jezebels. I'm talking about praying, interceding women of God who stand their ground. And, the thing that I'm trying to get across tonight, and then we'll go into the David Flynn thing, is, ladies and gentlemen, God does, for his reasons, and it's God and he can do it, put his treasure in earthen vessels. And shame on you if you smash the vessel and prevent that treasure from being placed in someone's heart and absolutely being fruitful and multiplying. And, Tom, I believe that some of these critics better take the words of Jesus to heart. It would be better for them to have never been born to cause these little ones to stumble. Because when people bear false witness, and then, the Bible specifically says an abomination. We're talking about the abomination that will make desolate tonight. But an abomination are those who sow discord amongst the brethren. And I've never seen a more discordant, pissant-like attitude than I'm seeing now. And I'm telling my listeners, Tom, whenever I go on talk radio, grow up, shut up, get on your knees and pray, and start to seek the Lord as if your life depends on it, because it truly does. Now let's talk about David and how he saw everything tying in. You vented, I vented, now it's vented. And I'm not going to defend any more to anyone. No offense, but with 100 guys assigned to me, with 10 individual false identities on the internet, I got 1,000 voices of damnation out there. And, I don't need another 5 to that. So let's talk about David and just get into that.
Yeah, and this is such a cool opportunity to do what a lot of others haven't done, and that's to give credit where credit is due, and to tie some of the research from by David Flynn into our discussion here about Petrus Romanus, the Vatican, and ET. But let's start by first giving an update to people on the Flynn book, because we have had a lot of email wanting to know when is the David Flynn collection, when is that going to be available. And here's what I can let people know. A lot of progress has been made. Steve, I got all the files you sent me. I got the file yesterday that's got the version of Cydonia that had the images in it that we needed. So both of the feature books, Cydonia, The Secret Chronicles of Mars, as well as the book that I published, Temple at the Center of Time by David Flynn, these have been set up now for the typesetter. We also received the new introduction from David's twin brother Mark for the front of the book. It's been edited, and it's also set up for the typesetter. David's family, via Mark, were very gracious to supply us with pictures of David all the way from the time that he was a young boy up through adulthood, and those are going to be included as a memorial in the middle of the book. Of course, this book will also include some of David's most famous articles that Steve mentioned a moment ago, discoveries at the back of the book, so that people will see the original research that has been so often plagiarized from David and used in other people's works, sometimes verbatim, but David's going to get credit for his original breakthrough materials like he should. For those that have been emailing and asking when they'll be able to get this collection, we're currently right now really only waiting on a cover draft. As soon as we get that, I'll send it to you, Steve, and between the two of us, we'll figure out what we want the cover to be exactly. And then I got those images from you yesterday. That was another big question. So the David Flynn collection really is very close now to going to the typesetter, and once that happens, we're really only probably around 6 weeks from having books in print. So that could mean that we'll have this large volume. It's going to be a big book. If you've seen Stephen Quayle's books, like the Giants book, it's going to be a big book like that because it's 2 complete volumes, his 2 most well-known and published books, and then also articles and pictures. But we're thinking now, probably around as early as June or thereabout, this book will be in print. So now, secondly, if you haven't read David's books, there is a reason used ones are considered a bargain at $75 a piece on Cydonia. In fact, Nita or somebody was telling me the other day they saw one for something like $500 or $600 was on eBay. But there's a reason, because David was, as Steve so eloquently said earlier, he was one of a kind. He was an original. And I don't know his brother Mark in the same way, but from what I understand from you, Steve, he's very much in that same vein. He's a genius. And the deal is true. I often said of David Flynn, he almost reminded me of a savant in the sense that he saw the world in a way that nobody else does. And he never ceased to amaze me with how he would see the world, and he would see measurements and distance and things like that, poor old spud picker like me, I couldn't see it at all. But I am a publisher, and I can speak directly to his book, Temple at the Center of Time. I should, of course, qualify that I could never fill David Flynn's shoes in describing it. Those of us like me, I think Dr. Heiser said this once before, certainly Steve has said it many times, others have recognized for some time that David was a man unlike any other, and that's the truth. So none of us are going to try to fill his shoes, but having said that, it was about 4 years ago when David contacted me, and he said, "Hey, Tom, I think I may have found something unusual." And what had happened was, by accident, David, well, first of all, he made one discovery, followed by more, and then more. And what he was doing is he was using satellites to make measurements on the earth that seemed to indicate that the location of the original Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem was related in time-distance anomalies to important dates in history, especially those that were related to nations that had either ruled or had shown interest in the cradle of civilization, and specifically this area where the temple was built. And the temple mount is considered sacred geography. It's the most holy site by many of the world's oldest religions, including the Jews, Muslims, and others. And there's good reasons around that. But until David wrote this book, what most of the world don't know is how important dates in history were directly connected to this site. For instance, this was the first thing he emailed me. What he found was that it is 539 statute miles from the point of the temple of Jerusalem's foundation stone to the palace of Belshazzar. This was the political center of Babylon, right? And more importantly, it was the exact location where the writing on the wall, the famous writing on the wall, occurred in 539 BC, and the kingdom of Babylon fell to the Medes and Persians the same night. So the anomaly here is that David discovered you have a distance in miles of 539, echoed exactly by the same number or date of 539 years BC, when Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin was written on the wall in the king's palace by a ghostly hand. This was a spooky occurrence that carried with it the meaning that Belshazzar's kingdom had been measured and that it had come to an end. Well, this was just astonishing. So what happened was, Flynn made that finding. He emailed me, but what he wondered was that just one astonishing coincidence, or would he find other specific locations specifically related to other kingdoms or governments that had ruled over or had affected the location of the Temple Mount, and whether the dates upon which their rule had existed would also correspond in mile relationships with the Temple Mount. And what he discovered was that they did, and it's astonishing. And that's what the book Temple at the Center of Time is about. Another case point, by the way, the relationship between Napoleon Bonaparte and his proclamation for a Jewish state of Palestine in 1799. That was the proclamation that increased a drive for Jews worldwide to pursue a sovereign state in Israel. But what's interesting is when you extend the measuring line from the historical center of Bonaparte's Paris to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, it shows the distance in nautical miles of 1799, exactly the same year that he called for a Jewish state of Palestine. So the intriguing connection to Flynn's research was clear. Napoleon made a proclamation of historical importance to the Jewish nation in the year 1799, and not coincidentally, evidently, the distance from Paris to the Temple Mount in nautical miles corresponded perfectly at 1799. And let me just give you one more, and then if people want to know more, they can get the book from us later. The most extraordinary part, I felt, of Flynn's research was when he learned how the year 1948 is marked by time-distance relations to the temple. David describes in his book how Britain was the nation that was friendly to the Jews. The British defeated the Ottoman Turks. They became the administrators of the land of ancient Israel in 1917. But from then, through World War I and World War II, until 1948, London was the heart of the governing intellect over that region. Well, then Israel became a nation again, May 14th, 1948, and if you extend the measuring line from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem to the exact center of ancient London, to the exact London stone underneath Cannon Street that marks its origin, a measuring line from the temple to the center of London produces 1948.40 nautical miles. So, over and over again in this book, time-distance anomalies, they go on in the temple at the center of time, including measurements from the Jerusalem temple site to the Great Pyramid in Giza, to the United States, to Russia, to Rome, to the Vatican City, other countries, and some of these include very intriguing mystical numbers like the number 33, the number 666, the number 2012. And after reading that book in its manuscript form, I was convinced that whatever these findings mean, and they are certain to be interpreted by different people in different ways, but whatever they mean, it appears at least to be mathematically improbable that all of that was just by chance. There's another part of that book, by the way, that's over my head and I can't even explain it, but it has to do with David using satellite mapping and history to diagram a pinpoint exactly where he believes that the lost Ark of the Covenant is located and where it will eventually be found or where it's being kept. And if you draw across lines on his measurements and you look at it from a satellite, there's a cave sitting out there in the middle of nowhere with an open mouth. So anyway, this was David, right? I mean, he saw things that nobody else had ever seen. He solved puzzles that nobody else had ever solved. And much of his research in Sidonia and much of his research in Temple at the Center of Time exists in other people's books with no attribution to him. But Steve Quayle and I have decided we're going to put his books in print in this collectible book, and then we're going to tell people, Steve, what we're going to do as far as making donations to his children and things like that.
Well, we basically, and with the help of David's wife, Brenda, and obviously Mark and the kids, and we're going to have a fund set up for the kids because it's only fitting that David had two children, David and Brenda have two children, and it's about time that with everyone ripping off his stuff, we just felt like it was the right thing to do in the Lord. So we're going to have this really cool thing, and it's going to be, I think, you know, we haven't named the foundation yet, but we'll, listen, neither Tom or I will have any control of the money. It will be distributed to the kids in real time. In other words, every quarter and stuff. But what we're trying to do, ladies and gentlemen, is present not only the man, not only the genius, but let you see this unique life. You know, what I don't think, Tom, one of the tragedies with all the critics out there, I don't think they ever understand what people go through, especially David, the last months of his life. By the way, he never lost his faith. He got down at times. And I remember the last time I was with him in his apartment, I spent all day with him, and he was showing me all the rocks and all of the artifacts that search through the mountains of Montana and all of the things. All I can say is this, is that imagine a child with a genius-level IQ and a way of seeing the world almost in if you will, in the most celestial, mathematical complexities, yet it was so simple, and it was his childlike faith. And I wrote in my introduction, and since I did know him, spent time with him, shared, we would never talk for hours and hours without sharing the excitement of what Jesus was doing, what Jesus was showing us. And, you know, it was like lo. Every time and I'm using the biblical word lo, it was like we were coming, the volume of the book, it was written to talk about the Lord, to lift up the Lord. And I don't think people understand that the motivation for his genius was his love for Jesus. I mean, I talked to Mark on the phone, and Mark said, you know, even from the time he was a little kid, he was raised a Catholic, but he knew that there were issues there, and then he just went out to find the real Jesus, and praise God, the real Jesus found him. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a man, in essence, I believe, inserted into the space-time continuum. Because the last talk I had with him, Tom, I said, hey, David, let's take the distance. And I asked him if he could do this, and you could see the wheels spinning. I said, now, when I say we, David, that means you, because you're way over my head in mathematics. I said, but take the distance to the different planets and the known distance to the stars, and let's take the square roots of them. And we started throwing out some stuff. I said, let's four-dimensionally model this thing and see what comes up. Well, obviously, maybe that was one place we don't get to go at this time in space. But the point is that it was exciting, Tom. I got to tell you something. You know how you do a lot of work, you do a lot of research and stuff, but you know when there comes someone into your life that just refreshes it? That's how David was. He was a refreshing voice, a brilliant, brilliant friend, but also someone whose absolute love and adoration for Jesus Christ was, in my opinion, unparalleled. He really did walk the walk, talk the talk, and he really is everything we're making him out to be. No embellishment, but look, the Bible does say, give honor to whom honor is due, and the man needs to be honored, not ripped off, plagiarized. And I personally don't talk to some Christian authors because, look, when they rip off me or rip you off, Tom, and stuff, what they're doing is they're not understanding so many times the Spirit. Oh, listen, research, we all draw on ancient writers' research and stuff, but when you paid a price for 40 years to come to the understanding, and then all of a sudden somebody goes and claims that as their own, I got to tell you, I understand. You turn the other cheek, but you just don't let it go unnoticed to the one who deserves credit. We're talking about David, so I'm excited to see the complete works, and I'm really excited. By the way, as the publisher of Cydonia, I can tell you this. I've personally seen those things sell on Amazon, and actually somebody sent me a screenshot of it. I think the highest one I ever saw was $1,100 or $1,200, and guess what? It sold. Even when I was a publisher, and I think I have 2 dozen or 3 dozen of the originals left, and they were spoken for. But, you know, the point is that you're going to get the best of two worlds. And I think the thing that sticks out about my mind, or above my mind in everything that he wrote in the center of, Temple at the Center of Time, was the distance between, obviously, Jerusalem and Mecca. You remember that one?
Mm-hmm, yes.
It was 666, wasn't it, statute miles?
Yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, now we're dealing with, I think, Tom, you were posting on Raiders News, is the Antichrist going to be a Muslim? Or is it going to be a Muslim? And here's the one. The last time you and I did the show, I got so much flack. I never shared the joy of it with you. But when somebody said Islam and Catholicism could never merge. Well, we're told in the Bible, for all those, how should we say this, emotionally challenged people, that they are going to merge because there's going to be a one-world religion, and the kings of the earth are going to give their power unto the beast. Such a simple thing, but yet it escapes everyone. And I don't think that as the days grow darker and the days grow more perilous, and given where the United States is now compared to most of where our grandparents and our parents, my parents, your parents, where all of our parents were at, I mean, this ain't the same old country. And I wrote, we're no longer in Kansas anymore. And unfortunately, the ruby red slippers don't click, and we don't get to go back to Kansas and get out of Oz. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will keep you informed. The minute it's available, or within 2 weeks, the publisher. Obviously, Tom will have it on his website. You can order it from him. You can order it from me. The proceeds will be, and we'll define it up front. And what we're waiting for is our final cost. This is going to be a big book, Tom.
Yeah, it's going to be a big book, and but I'm hopeful that within a couple of weeks, I'm going to be on the road for a couple of weeks. I'm working on this documentary film on transhumanism, so we'll be on the road for a couple of weeks. If we get back, will be the launch of Petrus Romanus, and I can already tell that I'm going to be just swamped doing media. But thankfully, the Lord has blessed me in that I have a staff that work for me full time. And so basically all I have to do is just, be the answer guy. They pick up the phone, they give it to me in yes and no's, and I sit and hold the phone and say yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no. So nothing that I'm doing with Petrus Romanus will hold up the project for the David Flynn collection. And actually, the cover designer already has. We were waiting to get the book that you sent me. I had to get a copy of it. They're going to scan a high-res copy of the front cover of Sidonia, because they're going to use, both books are going to be on the front cover of the new book, plus some other information, and hopefully a picture of David Flynn. But we'll figure all that out. As soon as I get the first draft, I'll send it to you. What do you think, Steve? What do we want to change? What do we want to tweak? But that shouldn't take us very long, and then Daniel Wright, the cover designer, he'll get that thing done quick. We'll get all the files over to the printer, and right now the printer is turning stuff around pretty fast. About 4 weeks from the time they get the files, we have books. So that's why I'm assuming that, probably hopefully sometime around June, we'll have this new book, and it's going to be a terrific collector's item for anybody that ever cared anything about David and who now want to celebrate this wonderful gift that God gave us in this man. And also be able to contribute something in support of his kids. They're going to have the opportunity to do it. So it's a wonderful idea. I couldn't be more excited about it. I'm glad to be working with you on it, Steve. And like you said, when we get ready to do the print run, you just say how many copies you want. I'll add some copies, and they'll go. And it'll also be in distribution, so people will be able to buy it through the stores if they want to. But the ones that they buy directly from me and directly from you, there will be a contribution that will go into that memorial fund for the support of his kids. Now, another thing that David did to get back on you want to get back now on this?
Yeah, let's get back on that, because I'm going to ask you this. I want you to know I'm going to ask you a question. Did you, at this point in time, your original thought and everything that Chris put together, have you guys changed your mind on who Petrus Romanus will be? Or do you think it's still hidden?
Well, I have my suspicions, and it'll be published in the book. But I'm telling you that since I'm not a member of the College of Cardinals, I'm not a part of the Roman Curia. I'm not hedging for any particular reason other than I'm not a part of that occult society, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And there are some very strange things that are going on that we've only been able to put part of our finger on. But here's the bottom line. People aren't going to have to wait very long. Benedict hinted that he might retire as soon as next month. Now, I don't think he's going to, by the way. I have reasons to believe it's going to happen later on this year. But the point is, it's most likely going to happen in the year 2012. And that's what the Rene Thibault, the mathematician we already talked about, the Jesuit code breaker, that's the year that he determined 61 years ago that the final conclave would occur in the year 2012. So we're going to find out if these Catholic mystics, if these various prophecies, everything from the prophecies of the end of the Mayan calendar, all the rest of it, we're going to find out. But there is something very, very strange going on with the year 2012 that includes a whole lot more than the rollover of the Mayan calendar. And it very much seems connected to the prophecy of the popes, to the arrival of Petrus Romanus, to the arrival of the Antichrist. People who didn't listen to that first show ought to get it and listen to it, because we pointed out how it's not just a 900-year-old Catholic prophecy. So imagine a prophecy that goes almost halfway back to the time of Christ. this long prophecy that foresaw all of these different popes, and the very next pope following Pope Benedict XVI is the final one on the list, Petrus Romanus, the false prophet. He helps give rise to the Antichrist. And you look at Pope Benedict right now, he seems like they're squeezing the last little bit out of him, if you will. They're sending him everywhere. He went to Cuba. He's going to go to other places, but he's being rolled around on a cart. He can't go up. He's got to be carried up stairways. He's getting feeble. The Vatican's own newspaper has stated just a few weeks ago that he seems to be worn out. Well, he's old, right? And some people handle age better than others. And the Vatican's own newspaper also said as a result of that the College of Cardinals right now are preparing for the conclave that is going to elect his successor. And anybody listening to this show, and we'll have a lot of Roman Catholics listening to it, we might have people out of the Vatican listening to it, are aware that what I'm saying is it's really not news. I mean, it's being published everywhere, but those are facts. Now, could Benedict continue to be the Pope on into 2013, 2014? Well, anything's possible, but it's not probable. And the prophecies, definitely, of occult sources have said that it's going to happen in the year 2012. It's not just the prophecy of the popes. We talked in that last broadcast about the Zohar. 700 years ago, Jewish priests, Orthodox priests, prophesying when their Messiah would appear. And they said it in the year 5773 in the Jewish calendar, which in our Gregorian calendar begins in the new moon this September. Now imagine that. 700 years ago, they prophesied when their Messiah would appear, and they said it for September of 2012. But given the fact that they rejected Jesus as their Messiah, Christians would understand their prophecy as heralding the arrival of the Antichrist, right, in the year 2012. And so then we talked about all the other things. The Mayan calendar ends in 2012. The Aztec calendar ends in 2012. The Cherokee Indian ends in 2012. Mayan inscriptions in two different places. They just found a new one where it talks about the Mayan underworld god Bolan Yactecu, which actually sounds like an alien invasion because it talks about all these motherships or whatever, these what's called support gods, but these giant things descending very quickly to the earth. That's in the Mayan inscriptions. That's going to happen in the year 2012. The Hindu Kali Yuga calendar ends in the year 2012. And then we talked about how Jonathan Edwards, America's most important original philosophical theologian, the greatest intellectual, how he predicted two things. Really, that the Antichrist will appear in the year 2012, but he will break his covenant with the Jews in 2016. So now all of a sudden we have two dates that appear to be important. One is 2012, one is 2016. And there's a lot of stuff we didn't talk about in the last show that's related to that. For instance, June 21, 2016 is exactly 3.5 years, the midst of the week, after the end of the Mayan ending date, December 21st, 2012. But that's the same date that marks the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere and the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere, when a cusp line is created between Gemini and Cancer. And if you read David Oveson's book, The Secret Architect of Our Nation's Capital, he refers to that date as having very deep astrological significance to the founding and the secret destiny of America. So there's a great deal more here. Also really important to recognize that based on Daniel chapter 9 and the related text, scholars believe that a period of 70 years, or a biblical generation, will elapse between the reformation of Israel as a nation and the return of Jesus Christ. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? When 70 years is added to 1948, the year that Israel was formally recognized as an independent nation by the United States, it brings us through the year 2018, which means that the year 2019, exactly 7 years after 2012, would mark the year that Jesus Christ returns with the armies of heaven to establish his rule over the earth. So is all of this what is all of this, Steve? I mean, there seems to be a concatenation of events that are unfolding, that are involved with the year 2012, that are mathematically impossible. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I understand simple stuff like, 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times. There's a point where pretty soon you hit the exponential curve, and those numbers, those probabilities go into the stratosphere, and we've only scratched the surface. If you read the book Apollyon Rising 2012, you find out that actually the most remarkable connection, the year 2012 for me in that book, was how the Maya directly linked the years 1776 and 2000.
Hey, Tom,
yes.
Tom, hold on. Something's garbling you. Could you repeat that? You just garbled really bad.
You did earlier, too, so I sound okay
Steve
now?
And, Tom, it's probably an hour in, Steve. What I need to do is refresh the Skype connection.
Okay.
Everything is going on tape, though, so there'll be no garbling there.
Okay.
Tom, why don't we do this? If you all will both give me exactly 2 minutes, that'll allow me to refresh the connection.
Okay.
And Steve,
you
I'm
want to
going
take
to dial you right back.
It's the top of the hour at 10. You want to just take a break?
Hey, perfect timing. It's right on the money. So let's take a break. And
okay.
Steve, I'll dial you back. We'll be back in about 5 or 6 minutes, folks. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Omega Man Radio. We'll be right back.
Well, Tom, before we went and got interrupted by the breakdown in Skype or whatever, I want to give you the time to finish out your thought. It didn't seem like we were there.
Well, I think I was getting on kind of a roll. That's happened. When you get anointed, that old saying, it's amazing what you'll say when you get anointed. But much of the research in Apollyon Rising 2012, that's the point that I was going to make, it's kind of like part one of Petrus Romanus. If you read the book Petrus Romanus, and if you have read the book Apollyon Rising 2012, you'll kind of see the connection between part one and part two, in that this book, in many ways, of course, it breaks a lot of fresh new ground, but in many ways it kind of picks up where we left off in that book. But the most remarkable connection to the year 2012 in the book Apollyon Rising 2012 was how the Maya had recognized that there was a direct link between the 2 years, 1776 and 2012, in a way that, if you will recall, Steve, you and I talked about this a couple of years ago, that Richard Luxton, who was the academic that had interpreted the Book of the Kumeyaal, the council book of the Yucatec Maya, from the 1500s, it was what he put in his personal notations on Katun 13 Ehu. He wrote this, and I grabbed it while we were on this break. He wrote this. He wrote, quote, "The dates that accompany the illustrations approximate real counts. Katun 13 Ehu began in the colonial count 1776, and the end of the Eastern Katun cycle in 13 Ehu is intermingled here with elements of the Christian Last Judgment. Whether this paradigm was also intended for the end of the long count in 2012 is open to question," end quote. And when I first found that years ago, I found that that statement is what then caused me to begin communicating to different Bible scholars and asking them, do you know of any direct connection between the Great Seal of the United States of America and the year 2012? And the reason I was asking that is when I saw this connection between 1776 and 2012 and the 13-stepped countdown, the Katun 13 Ehu, immediately what happened was the Great Seal of the United States jumped into my mind, where at the base of a 13-stepped pyramid you have the year 1776, over which is hovering the all-seeing eye of Apollo. Now, we're not going to talk about that. By the way, if people want to know more about that and that conversation, Steve Quayle and I did, I forget how many hours on that very subject. It is still over there on the website ApollionRising.com or ApollionRising2012.com. And if you go over there, you'll find the website that Steve and I did. And what's ironic, Steve, is there's a quote down there from David Flynn talking about how he thought it was one of the best shows he had ever heard. So isn't that ironic? But people can go over there and they can listen all about that and find out all about that. But the point I was making before the break is that there's something super unusual about 2012, and most people really don't get it. I mean, they think that it just has something to do with the end of the Mayan calendar. That's really just a freckle on the blueprint of what's really unfolding, and how many different ancient societies, some of which we mentioned before the break, some of which we could talk about at some other point, but in addition to that, consider that in 2012 the United States will elect a new president, hopefully a new one, maybe re-elect the same one, and Michael Savage says if we re-elect Obama, it'll be our last president. In 2012, the United Nations gets new leaders. 2012, Petrus Romanus is supposed to materialize. It wasn't also, by the way, it wasn't just Jonathan Edwards, but there were other early century writers like Reverend William J. Reed, who something like 130 or 40 years ago wrote his book Lectures on the Revelation concerning the papal system, and he wrote, we are prepared to answer the question, when will the papal system come to an end? It will be destroyed in the year 2012. So what in the world, Steve? Why were so many individuals, most of them of an occultic nature, these others like Jonathan Edwards and Reverend Reed and others of Christians who would have been inspired by the Holy Spirit, why were they so fixated that in the year 2012, several things were going to happen? One, there would be distress among the nations. Secondly, there would be the coming of a messianic figure, the Antichrist, a false Christ who would appear, the arrival of the false prophet. And by the way, many of these cultures, on a different subject you and I have also covered numerous times, also talked about this being followed by the emergence of a new enlightened form of humanity. And when you look at, for instance, the prophecy of the Cumae Sibyl, the Novus Ordo Seclorum on the Great Seal of the United States, she specifically talks about a new golden age in which once again the gods will be commingled with mankind. She's talking about a reintroduction of Watcher/Nephilim/Gibborim activity happening upon the earth. And if you read Apollyon Rising 2012, you'll see that that's dated to occur in the year 2012. Then you have Rene Thibault, the code breaker, saying that it's going to happen in the year 2012. Anyway, the list is spooky. It's not just the Maya. They're only one small part of a much bigger picture that goes back into thousands of years of occult societies, looking forward to one event horizon, Steve, and they targeted the year 2012 in a way that's, I agree with the professor that interpreted the book of the Kumiel, Richard, that it seems to smack of the Christian final judgment prophecies, the book of Revelation, the books of Daniel, the prophetic texts that tell us a time would come when a false prophet would appear, a false Christ would appear. The world is going to accept them as their messianic figure. The non-religious will just see them as heroes, if you will, political figures who are going to solve all of our issues. Religious people are going to accept them, and it is going to be both the Islamic community and the Vatican, the Catholic community, and much of the evangelical community. They are going to accept this individual as their coming Messiah. Now, the thing I loved about David Flynn is where a guy like me could do a tremendous amount of research, and I'm blessed to have people that I can, put on task to do research for me. And I hope that it doesn't sound like what I'm saying is my research is superficial. But compared to David Flynn, a lot of people's research is superficial. Because what Flynn did was he looked past the surface information. He looked past even these various occult sources and societies to find what was the source of the Mayan, the Aztec, the etc. Where was their knowledge coming from? which then also would tie to the true source of the ET, UFO, abduction phenomenon, information coming out of the Vatican. But what's really behind it? I think that's one of the things that really drove him is what is the source, right? Where's it coming from? Who's inspiring all of this? So somebody prophesied. So what? What was behind it? And you may have read recently one of the entries on Raiders News Update into the Petrus Romanus series. And by the way, you said a moment ago, Steve, that chapter 17 was up. Well, actually, these are not the chapters in the book. This is just a lot of material based on research in the book.
Right, and I apologize for that. I was excuse me. I'm glad you made that clear because, again, you do this typically when you bring out a book. You put so much cool information that I call that wetting the whistle stops.
Well, a lot of it is because you'd be amazed how many people email us and they'll say something like, I can't even afford to buy the book. So we try to put just a ton of information out there that can help people. On the other hand, the Lord has instructed us to be good stewards, and I have people whose life depends on me being able to pay their salary. So there also is a stage at which I have to be able to function. You've probably heard these people in the past that have said, well, if you were really a man of God, you'd just give it all away free. And the answer to that is, yeah, I'd do that for a few weeks, and then everybody that works for me and depends on me and myself, we'd be bankrupt, out of business, and we wouldn't be able to share another thing with you because it takes revenue to be able to function, right?
Oh, yeah, I don't think, Tom, I don't think people understand. Literally, when you do a website, I mean, you pay for everything. And I remember one day adding up the money I'd spent on just talk radio because it wasn't always gifted or gratis. When I was on shortwave, it was like $75, $85 but when you get up to $750,000 for 20 years, not
right.
counting your website, and my website costs somewhere around $30,000 to $40,000 to maintain. And then that's not even counting all the times I would take trips and stuff. And I don't ask, I want to share something. I've got I believe, some of the neatest listeners in the world because I do, and when I'm able, I give a lot of books away. But I know there are people, when I hear that, if you were really a Christian, I basically want to say, what in the Hades do you do? Well, if they're on the Internet, they can at least afford the Internet. If they're emailing me their, convulsive requests. And one guy basically said, I got more important things to spend my money on your book, but it sounds interesting. I sent him back an email and said, no, thank you. Your heart's not ready, and your mind certainly isn't. And I'm serious about that, okay? Now, look, I've given, and I'm not saying whoopee, but it's just I say to any veteran, they can have my book, and I'm not speaking for you on this. I'm just speaking for myself. But even then, one lady got mad at me. She says, I don't care how much money and books you give away. You're an angry man. Well, so is God. He's angry at sin every day. And I think that, we've got such an explosive. I'm sitting here going, okay, we've got 2012, 2019. Let me make it clear to everyone. I think you just said it. It's a freckle, the Mayan calendar. There are thousands, if not 10,000, ancient arcane writings, all pointing on it. And Tom, my contention is the fallen angels. Not only if you really go almost word for word in the book of Enoch or in Hanok, and I've got one of a really good translation by a very brilliant man who gave me permission to reprint it for my listeners. The point that I think people have got to understand. Let me give you a good example. MySpace and Facebook. You know what that was called in Star Trek East? That's the Borg. And a very prominent man who's now dead, brilliant beyond, and at one time associated with Majestic. And if you don't know what Majestic is, go Google it. He said, Steve, where do you think the ultimate control lies? And I said, with he who not only develops. He said, no, it's not he who develops it, it's he who controls it. And he maintained, Tom, now listen to this, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but he said that the whole, you're going to love this, the whole social networking, especially in virtual reality, was an alien, not meaning foreign to the boundaries of the United States, but not of this planet. It was, if you will, the ultimate web to snare everybody into the hive, H-I-V-E. For the record, the word hive exists in special operations terminology for the giants that are in stasis, and I've talked about good night, Dr. Moldeshev, who has seen them, and all the different people that have viewed them. I've had people in my office, and they said it's interesting. He said it's a simultaneous sharing of a command that goes out. It's like, if you will, an alien mind-melting neural network. Am I being clear? Does that come across clear enough?
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is how so much of the presentations, you know, I've been traveling the U.S. this year, going to these different conferences, and they want me to talk about what's happening now with neural networking. Actually, the whole hive mind issue, the approach of strong artificial intelligence, how we're going to create systems that will allow the brain to be integrated with strong artificial intelligence systems, what the state of the future from the Millennium Project is saying. You know, all these, what the Jasons are saying to the Department of Defense, and it sounds very much like what you're talking about right now. That on the near landscape, there is a moment in which we are going to be integrated with machine intelligence, but there won't be any coming back from it. And so then you have to question, what does that even mean? If we won't even be human anymore as we understand it today, but what are the implications of it?
Well, I think the implications, and this is what people have got to understand, nobody is a better authority than King Jesus. Jesus said, except for the sake of the elect, if those days weren't shortened, there'd be no flesh left alive. I can basically, give Ray Kurzweil, a great title for whatever he wants to title his next book, No Flesh Left Alive, because when you and I first started taking on transhumanism, singularity, genetic Armageddon, mutagenic properties of radio frequencies, and when you wrote Apollyon 2012, and I was writing Genesis 6 and whatever else I was writing, I mean, it's just all back there in history. The thing that was amazing to me, Tom, was the absolute, as you and I, and look, I'm not taking credit, but I believe this is my calling and your calling. It was almost, you and I would say something, then immediately they would come out and counter it. I think you've noticed that. And I mean, you've been taken on by, some of the transhumanists, and I forget the guy that wrote the essay, and basically to them, we're Neanderthals. But the point is that when somebody called me a Neanderthal, I said, well, yeah, remember this, that you were taught in anthropology that was in the family tree or lineage of Homo sapien. I said, guess what? Separate species. What does that do? And I said this, it's a good thing you guys didn't, I said the only thing lacking in anthropology is the jawbone of an ass, courtesy of Samson. I said, because then you could have built a whole new man, and I don't even want to tell you what I called him, okay? Well, I'll tell you this, Assicus ridiculous, about, around the jawbone of ass. People don't know what I'm talking about, is that entire, whether it's Australopithecus,
tell me again, because only Steve Quayle could come up with this. Assicus what?
I forget what I just said. Assicus stupidicus. Because again, I'm sorry, but I come on, it's a biblical term, or maybe it should be more biblical. Assicus dumicus. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
That dumbass speaking. That is a scripture. Look, here's what I think. I want to say this one more time. I don't even know where it is on my website. I got so much stuff on there, but it's called The Map of the Creator. Have you ever seen that? The one that's 500 million years old, and it's absolutely the Earth and every single terrain feature from outer space. It's almost as if you were basically with the Hubble's telescope looking down on the Earth and every ridge, every valley, and they claim, and look, I'm not going to argue over dating, but and even these things, they all have that coordinated time sequencing. So here's what I'm saying. I don't believe, Tom, that people understand that they've already, if they're on Facebook, and I am opposed to it, if they're on, what is it called, Twitter, Flitter, whatever it is, I know what Twitter is, and I really don't. I'm not on it, okay? But basically, the thing that people have got to understand, you have been assimilated. Before you were told you were going to be assimilated. And when I was talking to a special operations general, he said, Steve, this is how the giants return. This is how the fallen angels work. I went, oh, I get it. That's even their alien technology. And he said, you're starting to see it now. So, Tom, here's what we're trying to tell people tonight. okay, everything is in place for the final pope, the revealing of Antichrist. If people don't like the time frame 2012 to 2016, putting Jesus into 2019, I'll inevitably get, well, we're going to be out of here before then, so all you guys are wasting time. Well, if you're wrong and we're right, then there's some interesting dilemmas that let's say, this forces those who would criticize to deal with. So the hive mentality, okay, that hive mentality is what's coming back. Because when you deal with the world of the occult, it's amazing. And I've interviewed enough of those guys over the years, and ladies, to know that it's like they know that they know when they're all together. And I'm not just talking about Beltane or Samhain or whatever. I'm talking about there is a hive-like mentality. Now, if you oppose the hive, you're given the most wonderful thing that God, the King of Glory, has ever created, and it's called free will. I'm not chemically determined. I'm not a spontaneous outburst of an amoeba's love life. You know, we are... You've got to have that one, too. We are absolutely designed with the most careful, the most beautifully articulated genius, the fingerprints of genius, the heart of God, the absolute Spirit of God, the good night, the Ruach, you know, I think it's what in Hebrew, Ruach, I can't do it, but Ruach HaKodesh, you know, and the thing is that we exploded with life, and now, can I tell you something? We're too, and I'll use this word because the other word would be offensive, we're too bloody lazy to even take up that cross, which represents all the power, all the absolute redemption, everything Jesus is. And when Jesus said, to as many as receive me, him speaking, gives he the power to become the sons of God, it is a question of power. And right now, the ball of power, if you will, is in their court. God did say, Tom, and I think you're the antidote for this. I'm the antidote. David certainly was. And everybody who writes apologetically, there's some amazing men and women of God out there writing. But the point is that God's people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Now, that's a cutesy statement until you start asking the Lord individually in prayer, Lord, does that apply to me? And God says in that Scripture, you know that, it's because not they aren't presented with the knowledge, but they renounce it or they reject it, okay? They won't embrace it because it interferes with their paradigm. You and I have talked about the day, if they have their way, there is no more humanity. And I got to tell you something. My favorite website is your website. I mean, I do mine, and it's a compendium of everything, and I really love Raiders because obviously you and I have been doing this long enough to know that, we know where it's headed, and we're trying to lead people out of the path of destruction. But I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about transhumanism, singularity, robotics, and sentient robots, and basically the Hercules gene being introduced into super soldiers, or all of the qualities that you're now hearing coming out of DARPA, I'm telling you, Tom, people have got to understand the day of apathy, indifference, and casual yawning, burping, and chirping in church is over, in my opinion.
Yeah, hey, listen to this excerpt from the Current State of the Future report from the Millennium Project. It's just a short excerpt, but think of the implications of this short paragraph. Quote, as computer code is written to create software to augment human capabilities, so too genetic code will be written to create life forms to augment civilization, end quote. Wrap your mind around that. And the bottom line is what they're saying, Steve, is your point, that humanity is being assimilated right now, that artificial intelligence is on the near horizon, that our brains will be integrated with these systems. But then what's going to happen is that our natural, God-created, normal, human gray matter is not going to be able to process the teraflops of information that will be necessary to be integrated to the Borg. And so then what's going to happen is new forms of life, genetic code, is literally going to have to be written that will then be integrated with our cognitive capacity in order to bring us up to a point where we will be able to appreciate being a part of this new Borg technology. This is being forecast for the immediate future. They're saying essentially right now the code has to be written. So, Steve, as always, you know, you're prophetic and you're ahead of the curve on what's happening, but most of the world's not going to get it. I would say this, and I found this out, by the way, after my house burned down last year. The sympathy, because we've talked tonight about, you know, the other side, the waterless cloud society that's out there working overtime, the buzzing flies of the Lord of the Flies that's trying to distract people from the truth. But there is another side to that, and I'll tell you what, when my house burned down, there was people from all over the world that wanted us to know that anything we needed, I don't care if it was money, a place to live, a car, automobiles, people were willing to give us anything. And if we had been the kind of people who would take advantage, we could have went on our website and said, oh, you know, please help us, and we could have milked a ton of resources out of people. I'd never do that, and so we went on Prophecy in the News with Gary Sturman, and we said, we're okay, don't worry about us. We had insurance on our home. We've got a temporary home. We're in it right now. The kind of stuff that can't be replaced is lost, obviously, you know, little pictures that the children made for us when they were coming up through school and that sort of thing. So it was particularly hard for Nita, but those are the kind of losses that money's not going to do anything to help anyway. And we wanted people to know that. Now, there were a few people that still gave anyway, even though we were telling them not to. And I can let those people know that Nita, my wife, she supports about 24 missionaries. And the revenue that came in went directly back. For instance, there was a guy and his wife that sent us a check for $1,000. A few days later, Larry Spargamino of Southwest Radio Church, him and his wife barely made it into their tornado shelter in Oklahoma, you know, last year when the tornadoes went through. And when they came out of their tornado shelter, there was nothing left. Their house, their barns, their vehicles, everything was gone. Well, then we turned around and sent those monies forward to them. Pay it forward, you know that movie? So that's what we did. And I'm very thankful to God that we are in a position where we would be able to do that. But what I'm saying is we found that there is also this other side, the real side, the true Christians. They really are there. And Steve, they're listening. They're paying attention to what we're saying. And you know it and I know it. And so we're very thankful to God that you and I have been put in a position right now as we're entering into the end of the end times, that we've been given some small opportunity to be a blessing to those people and to I haven't been a pastor for many years, but I can tell you, Steve, that in many ways you and I are pastors to these people, and we care deeply about them. And so I'd want people listening to this show to know that we're also aware of that side of the body of Christ, and we're very thankful to have the relationship, the friendship, the kinship that we have with them.
Well, and I think that's well stated. And I think it's important for people to understand that basically a bishop in the New Testament word, you know, the admonition from Paul was like, don't give them a hard time because they watch for your souls. We're trying to tell people right now actively that the ultimate soul catcher, the ultimate soul stealer, the very dark denizens of damnation are out to release. And, you know, then I love the other emails, okay? The other emails I get, oh, you just sell fear to sell your books, blah, 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 blah. My answer to that is that, look, I have stated 100 times, maybe 200 times, the antidote for fear is knowledge, okay?
Right.
And when someone comes with wet pants and tries to blame me that I made them, let's say, lose control of their body functions, I mean, that's going a little bit too far. I mean, seriously, Tom, the thing is that people are scared, and I have learned this, that if God's people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, then the reverse is true, that they'll be redeemed by the implementation and the obedience to that knowledge.
Well, here's some deep knowledge that David Flynn masterfully accomplished in his lifetime, in that he looked past the occult sources of these societies to try to find the secret source of Mayan, Aztec, and these other numerous cultures. You may, I was going to say this earlier. I posted a Petrus Romanus article. I sent it to Donna, and she posted it, that we're running at Raiders News Update right now, where it mentioned the Mesoamerican name Amaruca.
Yep.
And I'm not going to talk about that, but some people believe that that's the real origin for the name America. And in that article, we pointed to the legendary source of the Amaruca and Mayan, Aztec knowledge as having been delivered according to their beliefs by the dragon of many names, most notably Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl. But what we didn't take time to explain in that already lengthy article is how in the Mesoamerican pantheon, Quetzalcoatl is a demiurge who has descended into the underworld at this time to do, guess what, Steve, to rescue and to preserve the seed and the bones of the old ones.
Absolutely.
This is what we would call the remains of the giants or whatever that are in the underworld that the Bible talks about. He does that, though, in order to preserve that seed through the end of the fifth sun, the current time that we're living in now, so that it can be revived at the end of that time. Well, when does it end? December 2012. When the Mayan artifacts say that he's going to return with Bolan Yakteku and the other underworld realities, and then there's also going to be at the same time a descent from heaven of the 9 support gods or motherships or whatever in the world they are that are described in those fragments that we have there in Tortequero, Mexico, Tabasco, and one other place now that's been found that also speaks of the same prophecy. What's also important is this legendary figure, Quetzalcoatl, sounds almost identical in some of the pre-Hispanic writings. He sounds like he's none other than the legendary figure that the Sumerians called Gilgamesh, the Egyptians called Osiris, the Greeks called Apollo, the Old Testament called Nimrod, and that the world is soon going to know as the Antichrist, whose seed is preserved. And if you read the book of Revelation, it's brought up from out of the underworld together with end-time giants, I happen to believe. That's the way I interpret many of those texts. So what you're seeing is that in the pantheon, in the mythos of the Maya, they actually tell almost word for word the same story that you and I have discussed on numerous occasions from other extra-biblical texts like the books of Enoch and whatever, and the book of Isaiah, where it tells, and the book of Revelation, where it tells us that the time is coming in which up from out of the underworld, the beast is going to rise and is going to enter into Apollyon, Apollo, Gilgamesh, whatever, this legendary figure, he that was and is not and yet shall be. This legendary figure is coming back, or at least the spirit of that legendary figure, and it's going to inhabit the person we think of as the Antichrist. Now, in Hermetic iconography,
you better explain Hermetic iconography.
Well, okay, so
simple.
Symbolism, Hermenism, symbolism, in that kind of imagery, the beginning and the ending points of the sky are positioned where the ecliptic, the pathway of the sun, crosses the Milky Way. Well, ancient descriptions depict that hermetically, I almost can't talk now, depict that distance between those points as a snake that's called the Ouroboros. This is really famous, the tail devourer, that encompasses the heavens and swallows its own tail. That's one of the oldest mystical symbols in the world. It's in Aztec, Chinese, Native American mythologies, just all around the world. But in alchemical symbolism, the mouth of the snake is viewed as a place of arrival and departure of spirit beings. So gods, angels, Quetzalcoatl, whatever, you could also think of it as a wormhole. It's an opening or closing point where these gods can enter and disappear into, but that they use to navigate the dimensions of heaven. For example, the god Quetzalcoatl, who, besides the conversations we've had, he's actually the most well-known Aztec deity. He's portrayed as either being or entering the Ouroboros on Aztec and Toltec ruins. And in some renderings, there's actually a ladder that's seen descending from the ecliptic, such as when Quetzalcoatl descends from the sky on a rope ladder. You can see that in some of the Mesoamerican drawings. But anyway.
Hey, Tom, it's important for people to understand, too, the word Amaruca. That literally means the land of the plumed serpent, okay? Land of the plumed serpent. And what's interesting, just to throw some really neat stuff out there, in the book of Forest of Kings, one of the most famous Mayan kings is Shambhala. Very tall, and guess what? 6 fingers, 6 toes. Mm-hmm. Well, I guarantee he isn't playing billiards in the underworld, with an extra set of fingers. What I'm saying is that the land of the plumed serpent, and that is so interesting, feathery serpent, and that translates out into, if you basically go etymologically take it apart, it literally translates out into the dragon that fell with wings, okay?
Right.
Gee, who does that sound like?
Well, it's a dragon that has the power of air.
Yes.
And so when you look in the Bible, and it describes this dragon that's at war with the angels of God, and I got to tell you something. Before I headed to Lakeland, Florida, Gary Stearman called me because so many people were calling prophecy in the news, and they were concerned because they were hearing, these noises that they're hearing, this banging and clanging and all that's happening in different cities around the world.
Yes.
He called me one day that people were very concerned, evidently, that no prophecy in the news, but I guess in their town they were hearing these noises. And some people have described it as sounding like trumpets, but these people said it don't sound like trumpets. It sounds like the clanging of metal against metal. And Gary Stearman called me to discuss some other issues plus that and asked me what I thought. And I tell you, the description these people were giving caused the hair to stand up on the back of my neck, because the very first thing that came to my mind was it sounded like they were talking about swords clashing against other swords. And I said to Gary, Gary, is something breaking through now from another dimension? Is the war, the conflict between the angels of God and these fallen forces, is that conflict breaking out now to such an extent that it's bleeding over and we're starting to hear some of this? Well, I don't know if that's the case or not. There's no way to prove that, but it was the way it struck me at that moment. Well,
I got to tell you something. I got to share this with you. I think that you're onto something there, and I'll tell you why. 5 years ago, and I don't have the prophecy, but I'm going by memory, the Lord told me to warn His people that very soon the invisible would become visible, the things of their nightmares would become into their realm, everything they knew as norm would no longer be normal, and they would literally see the battle between heaven and hell played out before their eyes and ultimately be a part of it. Now, look, we know that all creation groans and travails for the manifestation of the sons of God. That's what the book of Romans states. But the thing is that beyond that, listen, how about this one, Tom? I never saw this until I think the Lord quickened it to me one night. It says, hell beneath is moved at thy coming, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, I used to think that meant that, everybody makes way for Satan when he gets thrown into hell. And I believe that can have a dual meaning, but I'm just throwing this out. Pray about it, everyone. I felt like it meant something different. It meant that hell from beneath is getting ready to come up on the surface at the coming of the evil one, in the category of woe unto you, inhabitants of the earth. For your old adversary, the devil, has come down and punked you, knowing that your time is short. I don't know if you've ever thought of that.
And not that way, but that's very interesting. That hell beneath is moved at thy, meaning the evil one, at thy coming.
Yes. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because again, here's the thing. I've heard, when I first heard the horns, it was interesting. I said, look, I don't know that God's necessarily going to allow everybody on earth to hear the trumpet judgments in heaven as they're trumpeted, but I said, I think everybody on earth thinks it's going to be Louis Armstrong sounding. And I'm serious. I mean, I think unless it's a modern jazz quartet, they wouldn't have a framework to reference it. But some of the stuff in the Ukraine sounded like almost, if you will, like foghorns, yet it was a transcendent. You know how as sound basically is it modulates, okay? It has a waveform that travels through travels through space, the atmosphere, whatever, not space, but the atmosphere. But this thing was more haunting. It was almost like if you will, it was like a giant foghorn with no point of origin, but a standing horn emanating from multiple points. That's the best way to explain it. And that's just one in the Ukraine. So I guess now that everything in that 5-year-old prophecy, and by the way, if somebody's got a copy of that, would someone please email it? I've got all my tapes from every radio show I've ever done, and I just don't remember what show, and unfortunately when those are being taped, they weren't, delineated well enough, but the gist of it is the invisible's coming visible, and what you're talking about, the clashing of swords, I believe, Tom, that's not just speculation or juxtaposing your thoughts on the events. I believe that's really happening, because I can tell you that's identical, and how you described it as to the prophecy I gave 5 years ago, may have even been 7 years ago. But anyway, there is a prophecy I gave on my radio show, and like a dummy, I don't know where I put it, probably in my filing system, and who knows where that's at. But the point is that I think it's critical for people to understand the lateness of the hour. They can mock, they can sneer, they can jeer, they can deny, they can belittle, they can slander, they can damn, they can do everything they want. But that doesn't protect them from when their eyes are open and their ears are open, and something much bigger, something much more nefarious. And I can tell you this, one of the most important things that anyone has ever taught me was the Mr. Langley, sent to me by a dear friend. CIA guy said the entire purpose of transforming the Earth, and terraforming was my word, with the chemtrails, was to change the dispersion of light. When God sent the rainbow, you're going to love this, when God sent the rainbow after the flood, saying he wouldn't destroy the Earth by water again, by taking that rainbow apart, if you will, and absolutely interfering with the light realm, L-I-G-H-T realm, of the different frequencies of light, they're enabling these things that God, in essence, imagine this, imagine the rainbow as God created as being a barrier to the principalities and powers of the air. In other words, it was our, if you want to say, force field, the force of Almighty God to keep those things out of us as we tamper. And that's why the Lord says that he's going to destroy those who destroy the earth. But this man was one of the highest-ranking CIA guys, and on his deathbed, he basically had a conversation with a man I know, and that's what was given to him, the most amazing understanding of why HARP exists and all this stuff. The Mayans, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Egyptians, by the way, mummified their dead because they knew there would be a time when they'd be brought back to life. Not just, quote, in the Book of the Dead. They knew they were coming back. And so it's something that's important for people to understand. So what you're saying about the Mayans of 2012 seems to be the revolving door for hell on earth. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, and the other thing is, people who may, think that the prophecy that you gave, the conversation around what are these strange noises on the earth, whether or not those particular noises are related to supernatural conflict exists, period. Or if you don't believe that, then you deny the Bible. That angels, there are good angels and bad angels, and there is supernatural warfare that is involved right now in the world around us. But we know that in addition to the facts of basic spiritual warfare, that there is coming a time where there is going to be war in the heavens. In other words, the conflict is going to be it's going to be increased to a new level, And that was the point that when Gary, I can't even repeat exactly the words he was telling me, these people in this community and what they were hearing, and everybody was saying it sounded like trumpets, and what they were saying to him is it doesn't sound like trumpets at all, it sounds like the clanging of metal against metal. And the minute Gary said that, man, I could see angelic warfare. And the fact that it is so intense now that it is starting to bleed over from in their dimension into ours, because there still is no explanation about what these noises are. Now, it could be the government's doing experiments, it could be HARP, it could be something else. I certainly have no insight on what's going on. All I can tell you is what my first initial and immediate gut reaction was to the way it was described to me that day, and it literally caused the hair to stand up on the back of my neck. And the first thing out of my mouth was, Gary, is something starting to bleed over from the angelic realm? And it caused Gary to pause too, and then we had a conversation around that. Well, what does this got to do with what we're talking about tonight? Petrus Romanus, E.T., extraterrestrials, the Maya, Aztec knowledge, David Flynn. What it has to do with is that these Maya prophesied that their gods were going to return, and they set that year in the year 2012. And ladies and gentlemen, we're here. This is 2012. And these multiple prophecies, some of them are thousands of years old. All of them are at least hundreds of years old. And some of these predictions are from people who are very well respected within evangelical and Catholic Christianity, who esteemed these people as being people of God. Oh, one other thing, by the way, David Wilkerson, who tragically died last year, he also said, Steve, something that sounded very much like the description you were making, how that as we get nearer to the end, their manifestations would start breaking through, and people would start seeing things and hearing things that were historically unprecedented, that would illustrate that this conflict, this period of time, darkness against evil, the intensity of it would be such that it would literally start manifesting itself within our physical world. He said that in his book, The Vision, many years ago. At least I think it was in his book, The Vision. If it wasn't that, it was another prophecy, and probably now that I've said that, somebody's going to make me have to find it, which I'll do. But these cultures, they believe. So if you're talking about Viracocha of the Inca, Kulkulcan and Bolan-Yactecu of the Maya, Quetzalcoatl of the Aztec, they believed that these gods would return at the end of their calendar date, the year 2012. But what Flynn did was, first of all, he recognized, oh, it's almost 11. Are we quitting at 11?
No, we're going on. You don't know that. Now, from now on, time will be no more.
Steve and Tom, let me make an announcement to those that are listening on Blog Talk. You want to switch over to OmegaManRadio.com. That's the live, uncensored stream. Blog Talk will go off at the 3-hour mark for the stream, although you can still listen to it at OmegaManRadio.com, so no worries. Keep going.
And we also may have some questions from listeners. I get all of that. So I'll try to do this real quickly. But part of the legitimate interest that David Flynn had concerned not just the year 2012, the prophecy of the return of these various entities and all that, but how all of this stemmed from the obvious fact that, first of all, the Maya, they were either unquestionably gifted mathematicians and astronomers or something else, because they measured or had knowledge of the length of the solar year, for instance, way more accurate than did the Europeans in the Gregorian calendar. They precisely oriented their sacred buildings and cities with stars and star clusters, particularly, interestingly enough, Pleiades and the Orion Nebula, which is associated throughout the ancient Middle East with Osiris, Apollo, and Nimrod. The pre-Columbian book, the Codex Dresdensis, what's also just known as the Dresden Codex by the Yucatec Maya, it's famous for the first known related illustrations of very advanced calculations, astronomical phenomena. So the question then is, how were the pre-telescopic Maya, who didn't even have the wheel how were they so uniquely aware of such important knowledge? And that's what's unclear. So that was what implied to a guy like David Flynn that there is a mystery here that needs to be solved. And what David discovered through a tremendous amount of research was that the Maya, the Aztecs, the Mesoamericans, they themselves, as well as did many other archaic cultures, they credited that knowledge as having been brought to them by ancient gods that came to the earth. And throughout Mesoamerica, it appears that they came through some kind of stargate, at least in their mythos. They have these big gated constructs that are built in Tiwanaku, various other places, that they ascribed as a portal through which the god had a mysterious kind of key, and those gods would come. Now, that sounds like a fairy tale, right? But it's the only explanation we have from their history about where this unprecedented knowledge that they had, that was far in advance of much of the rest of the world, where that knowledge came from. So what happened was, in 2008, David Flynn started making discoveries. And if you look at RaidersNewsUpdate.com/giants.htm, you'll see that much of the information, the size and the scope of it, simply surpasses comprehension. I don't know how many times I've read that article. David actually contacted me. He said, I'm using Google Earth and some other above Earth orbiting satellites. And once again, he said, I think I found something nobody's ever saw before. He wrote a bunch of the information, sent it to me. I edited it. I kind of cleaned up the language, if you will. So he and I kind of, sort of, wrote the article together, but none of the revelation was mine. It all came from David. Every bit of it was his. And what he found was mammoth traces of intelligence, carved in stone, literally covers hundreds of square miles. And I wrote at the intro of the article that, in my opinion, it was possibly the strongest evidence that was ever detected of prehistoric engineering by those ancient entities that were known and feared throughout the ancient world as gods. But I was talking about, of course, the giant offspring of the Watchers. Because what David did was, in similar fashion to how modern archaeologists, have recently found ruins of hidden Mayan temples in the Guatemalan jungle using these satellites, well, David, he used Earth orbiting satellites, and he imaged this vast network of patterns that surround Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, South America. They extend over 100 miles south into the Bolivian desert. But what's strange about them is that there are patterns that display geometric repetition, interlocking rectangular cells, mounds, perfectly straight lines that are cut deep through the rock into the earth, and it goes across everything. I mean, the topographical features, high plateaus that surround the lake, through floodplains, through hills, through cliffs, through mountains, these deep, straight, perfect lines that lay out these patterns upon the earth. There is no technology on earth that could explain how in the world these patterns were created. And I am still to this day astonished. I think, frankly, Steve, I think the only reason why National Geographic or somebody else hasn't picked that article up and wrote something about it is, first of all, they don't want to deal with the ramifications, and secondly, they have no clue how to explain what we're looking at. So
Tom, hold that thought, because we're going to get aced out with the changeover. Bruce, do you want to go ahead and announce it one more? And
yes, sir.
Stay until we come back.
We need those out there that are on Blog Talk to Now. Switch over to OmegaManRadio.com if you weren't listening there already, and you'll be able to hear this final segment tonight. We're still live on tape, and this will be available up in the archives later, the full 4 hours, for those that were on BTR and didn't make the switch. We're now live on the 4th hour. Continue on, guys.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I'll try to do it quickly, but the whole point is this. 12 miles south of Lake Titicaca located within the center of an array of geoglyphs. There are megalithic ruins. There at Tiahuanaco. Many people are aware of these, by the way, and other New Agers have written about it. It's actually known as the American Stonehenge, the Baalbek of the New World. That's one of the titles that's given to it. And if you know anything about Baalbek, you've got these enormous stones protruding up out of the earth. You've got the what do they call it, the stairway of the giants there, where you've got a stairway going up into what at one time, prehistorically, was a giant temple. And in order to make those steps fit your natural stride, you would have had to have been just enormous, something like 18, 20 feet tall, whatever, for those steps to relate, to a normal stride walking up.
And by the way, Tom, the guy that has actually he took Dr. Muldeshef is one of the Ernest Muldeshef is one of the most famous eye surgeons in the world. The only man to ever, I bet, transplant a complete an eyeball, even into the optic nerve. I mean, that's pretty good. He took one of Russia's most famous physiologists, okay? Actually, I think it was a professor at one of the universities, and he took him to Baalbek. And they actually have the footprints in that thing, and when I tell you the footprint, they have footprints that are in limestone that are huge. When I say huge, I'm not talking 36. I'm not even talking 48 inches. I'm talking somewhere close to 5 and 6 feet. Baalbek also has the largest single quarried stone in the history of the world, and it's called Stone of the Pregnant Woman. Saying all that, the point is Baalbek is supposedly, underneath Baalbek, is the largest hive, and I don't know, I can't prove this, but I was told this by guys that fight these things, literally, is the largest hive, or if you will, repository of giants and stasis, S-T-A-S-I-S, and it's interesting if people understand where Baalbek is, and again, in the Hebrew, they used to refer to a lot of those areas as the Valley of the Rephaim. And, I argue with a lot of my critics and people who came after me. The Rephaim are the giants. The Nephilim are the fallen ones. And I make the distinction again that giants are not demons. Demons are not giants. The book of Enoch teaches that the demon spirits just came from the, if you will, the murdered or the giants that were slain. And that as these giants that were slain, their bodies are reconstituted through genetic engineering, these demon spirits will enter back into them, reanimating the body, and they got long memories, and they got the same appetite for flesh, that they've always had. So it's interesting, isn't it? We hear about certain national soft drinks using aborted fetuses and stuff. See, what I'm trying to say, ladies and gentlemen, our entire atmosphere is being reconfigured for these things to return. And, Tom, do you remember the Norway spiral back in, what was it? Yeah. I think what people need to understand, even at Tiahuanaco, and I was just told by a former park ranger in Utah, it seems like Utah and the Four Corners region of the United States, where they actually have an area called the Valley of the Giants, that the spirals, every place I have been able to type spirals, both to prehistory and I'm talking, ancient history, the spiral was always a sign, if you will, of the location of a stargate, angel gate, whatever you want to call it. So remember who was in Norway when that appeared in the sky, and the blue beam. And if anybody doesn't know what it is, just Google Norway spiral, and you'll probably get the mail online. What I'm saying is what you're saying about all of the Mayan, Aztec, Incan, they all A-L-L, attribute their building of their empires to the giants that came from the east. And that's exactly where I was going with that. And David didn't just make that statement, but he went into tremendous research about all of the different cultures around the world that explained what otherwise cannot be explained. You're talking about some of the biggest stones in the world. People could go to Google, by the way, and they can type in Baalbek and then hit images and look at some of those stones. I mean, we don't have equipment in the world today that could fashion those stones and set them in place, and yet the original foundation
for some of those large temples there in Baalbek, you can see the original stones, and then you can see all the cultures that followed. The Romans, the Greeks, they put their little dinky stones on top of it and rebuilt over and over again, and then a war would happen and somebody would tear it up and then they rebuild again. But look at the foundation stones. Who in the world built them? Because there was no empire that followed whoever built them that could repeat that technology. In fact, at Tiahuanaco, there's no stones there that are as big as the ones at Baalbek, but there is one of the largest single stones ever to be moved and put into a building anywhere on Earth. It's actually 400 tons. So think about that. But the mystery is, the experts say that it was transported to Tiahuanaco from a quarry that is over 200 miles away. That's where that stone came from, 400 tons. So imagine how incomprehensible it is when you realize that the route of transport for a 400-ton stone over 200 miles had to be taken through a mountain range up to 15,000 feet. Who did that? We're talking there. You know, some of the extra biblical texts talk about some of these giants being as much as 200 feet tall. Well, there had to be something, because otherwise there's no conventional explanation for how those stones could be moved 200 feet through 15,000 feet above sea level, 200 miles, and then put into place in some of the temples that are there. And then you get these conventional historians that tell us that the structures at Tiahuanaco are only about 600 years BC, and that a pre-Inca civilization that didn't even have the benefit of a wheel or any other type of, didn't even have modern written language. I guess they put these 400-ton stones on the back of their ponies, their mules, and jacked them up there somehow, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I can tell you something interesting. As I've studied this, I had Brian Snoddy, SNODDY. If people want to go to my website, stevequayle.com, click on the Giants section and go to the illustrations. I don't know if you've ever seen that. I'll email it to you.
Okay.
But Brian did an email for me. The Giants had an ability, and I was told by people who have talked about this, and people smarter than I did, but they had a form of harmonic levitation, okay? They were able to offset gravity by emitting a sound through their nose and their, now understand, these are big guys, okay? And I don't understand how it did it, but if you take your hand and pound the desk, you watch stuff move, because obviously you're creating a shock wave. They were able to create harmonic levitation, and nobody in the world has ever said this but me. So if you hear it, ladies and gentlemen, they're just parroting it, because nobody in the world knew it until a certain person told me that. I didn't come up with it. The bottom line is that they were able to literally change the gravitational field of the surrounding area around the rocks and basic, if you will, float them on gravity waves. Now that's mind-blowing.
Well, and some type of technology like that corresponds to what the first Spanish chroniclers who arrived with the conquistador Pizarro in Inca, that was what they explained, that Tiahuanaco, in this instance, had been constructed by a race of giants using a science that they didn't understand. They called it Horus. And that before Chamacpaca, which was the period of darkness and the time of the flood and all that they had done this all before then, and that it was, in fact, it was so long before the Inca arrived that those great temples and stuff were already in ruins. Their early history says it was already in ruins, and they only had oral history about what had happened there, but that it was giants that had been created by Viracocha, or Coculcan to the Maya and Quetzalcoatl to the Aztecs, the god that they said came from the heavens. So in other words, the Watchers, those who descended from the heavens. And Inca mythology involving the giants, followed by a world deluge, well, that corresponds perfectly with all the legends we know, from the Maya to the Olmec to the Aztec cultures of Mexico. those stories are all consistent with Sumerian and Hebrew accounts of the flood and of the giant Nephilim, whose history of human sacrifices, by the way, also parallel Mayan rituals. The victims of Maya had their arms and legs held down while a priest would cut their chests open and rip their hearts out. Greek.
And by the way, let me just put it into perspective. Historians used to argue about that, but they were bloody, and I mean bloody cannibals. And it's my contention that many of the giants existed, and that these guys were basically kept from being eaten. The priesthood would keep from being eaten by the giants that were alive during those days by feeding them, and feeding them the sacrificed bodies, etc. On the heart. They probably ate the heart. But I think what's important for people to understand is Pizarro. What was the name of his chronicler, the Catholic priest?
Oh, yeah, I want to say Jimenez or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, it was something like that, and he basically told of an encounter where he and Pizarro and the men went into, and that the women had been forcibly, and I'm sorry to be gross, but split open by the giants raping them, and that they said God in heaven sent lightning bolts, and the Indians literally showed all of the, if you will, the faces of the rocks that were scorched with lightning bolts, and literally destroyed those giants on the spot. Now that's pretty interesting, okay? Because this isn't, this is before the Sci-Fi Channel, of course, and this is before the skeptics could get on their computers. But the point is that's 1590? I mean, it's really old chronicles, and these people aren't sitting there trying to say, gee, I'm bored in a new land where people cut people's hearts out and behead them and then toss their carcasses to giants. I mean, these guys were, if you will, they were the news reporters of their day, and they hadn't been bought off by the foundations of the world to control them. So the point is that they were telling what they were being told by the natives. Now, that's a first-hand account. That's a far different thing than all of the nonsense that we're being, exposed to daily. But continue on, because the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Incas all owe their origin to the fallen ones. Okay.
Yeah, and so the Maya prehistory echoes the advent of the Watchers, their giant offspring, but it also looked forward to a particular date, one date, 2012, the year that you and I are in right now, sitting here talking to only God knows how many people, and that could be beyond significant because it was around the year 2000. Well, it was in 2005. I happen to know that because the date is on the article when David Flynn wrote it. And David Flynn wrote a landmark article. This is one of his articles that has been fantastically ripped off by an awful lot of people. But he wrote it for my news service, the Raiders News Update, and we published it in 2005. In fact, I even got it published in 2005 by the UFO magazine and several others at the same time. So there's numerous ways to verify when he wrote it. But it was based on mutual research that we were investigating at the time. But he wrote the article. I didn't have anything to do with it, and the brilliance is all his. The article was called An Occult Translation of the Roswell Event Countdown to 2012. I've seen, by the way, that research, even very recently, this year, in so-called brand new books, where authors are out there and they're doing shows and they're making a name for themselves, and they have not given David one piece of credit, and it is almost a word-for-word ripoff of his occult translation of the Roswell Event Countdown to 2012. It was unprecedented at the time. It later formed the basis of his presentation at the 2005 Ancient of Days Conference in Roswell, New Mexico. Oh, and this reminds me, one of the things that we want to be able to do, Brenda, David Flynn's wife, she sent me, I don't know how many, but I think I've got maybe at least a half dozen or more of David Flynn's video presentations that he made over the years at Roswell and other places. I have not been able to get Richard Hoagland to respond to give me the one presentation that David was very proud of that he did with Hoagland, so I probably am not going to get that, and Hoagland may not even have it anymore. But we did get these other ones, and what I'd like to do when we put his book out is just provide that DVD with all of those video presentations for free with the book. So we'll talk about that more later. But the occult translation of the Roswell event countdown to 2012 tied a lot of this stuff together. It tied the Mayan together, but also with the UFO and alien abduction phenomenon that we started out talking about, and even with the role of the Vatican. This was a feature article. Even people who have credited David, it's been resourced, Donna tells me, hundreds of times by media, republished in magazines, print publications around the world. But what the extraordinary findings that David made actually foretold, that's the part that remains hidden to most of the world. Because what David did was like Dr. Ida E. Thomas, you know, our mutual friend.
Yes.
Thomas is still alive, by the way. You know, he's going to be 90 here pretty quick, and he's still, at times, he's still very sharp. But he, Dr. Jacques Vallée, Chuck Missler, others, like them people, Flynn, he became fascinated with a mysterious connection between the Watchers, aliens, the coming of the Antichrist, the Mayan date 2012, and he saw that there was somehow a fiber, there was a string that was running through and connecting all of these occult aspirations, even including Freemasonry and other Illuminatus related to the subject. So, if you read David Flynn's feature article, which we're going to include, the original 2005 article is going to be included at the back of the new David Flynn collection. If you read that article, you'll see how that he starts out citing how in 1928 the occult visionary Manly P. Hall had been writing about the Great Seal of the United States, but that careful analysis of the seal that Hall was writing about disclosed that there was this whole mass of occult and Masonic symbols. Hang on, I'm getting interrupted. Talk for a minute.
Well, I think, too, ladies and gentlemen, one of David's gifts was to be able to process an intense amount of data, and then with God's direction and guidance, put it together so all of these discontinuous or seemingly strewn through the annals of history, it would all be tied with a single thread. And I got to tell you something, you can sum the whole thing up in spiritual conflict. That's why, for those of you that are listening to, I recommend above all things, go to DerekPrince.org. DerekPrince.org, and it'll bring you to the site. The most impressive and, in my opinion, most life-changing group of tapes I ever listened to, which started me on my whole quest for the truth, was Spiritual Conflict. I think they call it the Spiritual Conflict series. So for those of you that really want to get a handle on this, now Tom was talking about the Aztecs, the Incans, and the Mayans. You know, I can't get over the fact that we now have little babies and their aborted fetal tissue being used as flavor enhancers in more than just soft drinks. And you asked me why God would judge America. One of the most interesting points that I have to deal with, or points of contention, is, well, God wouldn't judge America. Look at all the good things we do. And I said, name them. And usually they'll say, well, you send more missionaries. No, we don't. That's not true. And for the record, ladies and gentlemen, it's real simple. God says, if you do right, you'll be blessed. If you do wrong, you'll be cursed. And I've said this 1,000 times over the years I've been on talk radio, that God judges nations, and he judges them in time. He judges individuals as far as their eternal, where they're going in eternity. But there comes a time now when all hell is breaking loose. And as the hell literally breaks loose, people are going to see more and more strange phenomenon. That's why I encourage every single person that is listening to the show to memorize Romans 8, especially Romans 8, 26, 27, 28. And when Tom was talking about some of the giants being 200 feet tall, if you want to Google Colossus of Rhodes, one of the ancient wonders of the world, that was done in a life-size sculpture that stood over the harbor at Rhodes, the island of Rhodes, Rhodes, in the Greek islands. What was fascinating about the Colossus of Rhodes, though, is, again, you're dealing with the word the Titans. And the Titans were basically the elder gods, or in our case of talking, we are talking about the fallen angels that left their first estate. And so when you read about all the children of the Titans, and it's going to be interesting because most people don't understand that almost every single heavenly body or moon of our planets, and at least our solar system, are named after the Titans. Now, why is that? Did somebody just say, oh, let's say we got 12 things we got to name, and there's 12 Titans, maybe more than that, 1, 2, 3, more than that. The point I'm trying to make to you and for you is ancient history is before your eyes at all time. As Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. That which has been will be. And I think it's important for those of you that when you start to understand this, I made a statement earlier in the show that southern Utah has some amazing glyphs. I won't tell you where it's at, but I got a call and an email from somebody, and they shared with me they were a park ranger in a certain area in Utah. They literally have the same exact petroglyphs as they do in the Australian outback in the Ayers Rock, Ayers area. And it's I think Stan corrected my pronunciation, Deo did, but it's called the Wajina, Wodjina or something. I used to call them the Wajinga, but it's a Wajina. And the almost identical parallel are in Utah. So tell me this, do you think really the Australians settled the United States before the Chinese? No. What I'm trying to tell you is that the stargates that Tom is talking about, Tiwanaku, the usual place for a stargate is when the ley lines intersect. Every sacred place that's known as a sacred place has a stargate. When you see a spiral, whether it's a Norway spiral, please go Google that story, the Norway spiral, and then ask yourself this. Was a message being sent? Was it Project Bluebeam? Whatever you want to speculate on. But look who was in Norway. I won't tell you who was. You can look it up. And it's interesting that the ancients always equated the spirals with the entrance or exit point of fallen angels. Tom, are you there?
Yeah, and actually isn't in even some of the cave drawings where you see these very strange alien-looking like characters, you repeatedly see that spiral design as having been drawn on the cave walls, and that too is a phenomenon that recurs around the world, right?
Absolutely, and since they didn't have technical drawing and 3D laser printers, that's the best they could do. But the spiral, if you look at that's a very interesting thing because it's called the Coriolis effect. If you look at the galaxy, the spiral galaxy, if you look at the way water drains down a drain, if you look at a chambered nautilus, if you think of everything that's spiraled, even a corkscrew, I mean, all of the seashells, it's a fascinating study, but one of the points that has to be made is that, Tom, it doesn't matter what a person thinks, they can dismiss all this stuff, but there is more evidence to what we're talking about than there is to evolution, which is just nonsense. And now, the goal of the elitists, the luminaries, the Luciferians was to keep all this secret knowledge hidden because knowledge is power, and to utilize it to their benefit at the time. And based on what David has done and you have done, I've done and others have done, we've pretty much pinpointed the return of the fallen ones and the reintroduction. Can I deal with one quick
Sure.
issue? Today I got about 6 of them. Well, what happened to all of the giants? Weren't they all wiped out after Noah's flood? Well, the Bible says there were giants in those days and after the days. And you have made the best case for it. If both before the flood, the giants tried to sexually corrupt the human race. They did it. Almost succeeded with the exception of Noah and his immediate family. And then after the flood, and now you have said that obviously that Nimrod began to become a Giborim. And the thing that's interesting is all the genetic engineering. Listen, all of DARPA's advanced stuff, even beyond what the typical 4-star general knows. I mean, it's alien-based technology, but it's more so than anybody. It is fallen angel technology because when you go into the Golden Age, if you study, obviously, Atlantis or Hyperborea or Ultima Thule or, Lemuria, any of those, Shangri-La, all of those civilizations passed away. And the interesting point, Tom, is they got to a point where they started to mingle animals and humans, or animals and angels, and God said enough. I just want to ask you, don't you think the Lord's going to say pretty soon, quit messing with my creation? Because, look, we're there. If Jesus stated that except the days be shortened or sped up, that there'd be no flesh left alive. I don't think that people understand the ramifications of that someone's working night and day to destroy everything that God brought forth.
Yeah, well, and in point of fact, when his disciples said, when is the end going to come? When will enough be enough? What will be the sign of thy coming? He said, as it was in the days of Noah. And so when you see that activity happening, know that the end is near. So when you ask the rhetorical question, when is God going to say enough is enough? He already told us when. When we start repeating the same thing that happened during the days of Noah, he's going to say enough is enough. Well, what does that mean then? When you realize that right now around the world in thousands of laboratories, we are creating species that are part human and part animal. And by the way, you and I did a show, let me see, what we got, 30 minutes? You and I did a show, I don't know, a few years ago, and I think it's called The Days of Noah or something like that. And in that show, we talked about how in 2008 or 2009, Reuters had interviewed those scientists out of Britain that were doing human-animal chimera research for the pharmaceutical industry, but how that they had gone to the government of Britain and they wanted to know if they could have taxpayer revenue to further their research. And there was this big hoopla in Britain among the pro-life community that didn't like the idea that a part animal, part human would be created that then would be experimented on as an embryo and then would be destroyed. Well, those scientists were back 24 months ago, and there was another Reuters article, and you'll even recall the article. It was called Scientists Want Debate on Animals with Human Genes, and the very first paragraph had to do with creating mice that could speak, dogs with human heads and hands and feet, and British scientists wanting to know if those kind of experiments would be acceptable. And if you read that Reuters article, what they were saying was, first of all, some of their colleagues already were pushing the envelope, already were creating human-animal chimeras that they were raising to full maturity. That's what they were alleging. Well, people at the time, when you and I talked about that, people couldn't believe that that was actually happening, that they were raising these Splice-like creatures. As a matter of fact, it was about the time the movie Splice came out, and you recall that I asked you, because I hadn't seen it.
Yeah, and I said it was the most repulsive thing. I went into detail how, obviously the husband or the scientist has sex with the offspring that they create out of this mass of goo, and at the very end, the baby that they produce, the scientist, the scientist and the woman, or the hybrid woman, produce a thing that all of a sudden grows into a giant with, a fallen angel-like creature, 8-9 feet tall with wings like an angel. Now, somebody knew a whole lot, and that's that time you and I did that show, Tom.
Yeah, that was right when we did the show. The movie had just came out. I since saw it because somebody sent me the DVD so that I could watch it. It's kind of a gross movie. But, yeah, so it was a very Nephilim offspring type film talking about splice-like creatures.
But sex was really important in that. Sex, you had to have, again, the splice-like, remember the laboratory thing? Had to be then, then he inserted his, semen into her, and then the baby, and obviously the thing at the end kills the father of the progeny of the fallen, or not the fallen, but the genetically created female with the tail.
Well, here's what's important. You and I, now people can go, here's again, Steve, when you and I happen to be on the front side of technology talking about things that people couldn't believe. They're saying, you guys are out of your mind. This isn't really happening. You've watched too many movies, blah, blah, blah. And Reuters sent a journalist this article. In fact, if somebody wants to email me, I'll send them the article. I'll send them the link to the article. It's still cached online. It's called Scientists Want Debate on Animals with Human Genes. It was published, I think, in 2009. And that's when you and I did the article. And at the time, I was saying that I felt, and you felt, that what these scientists were asking for was permission to essentially develop islands of Dr. Moreau, where they could raise these things to full maturity for long-term experimental purposes. And you and I both alleged that it already was happening, that in other words, they were asking for permission after the fact, that it already was occurring, and they were alleging the same too. Well, some people thought we were crazy, other people weren't sure. Well, guess what? Fast forward to now, and in just July, the Academy of Medical Sciences in Britain admitted that that science had been going on before that article and since that article, and that in fact it's advancing so quickly, they are calling now for an international regulatory commission to oversee the creation, Steve, of fully mature half-humans, half-animals. We're not talking about animals that have a little bit of human genetics. We're talking about 50-50 integration. And if somebody wants to email me, I will send them the report from the Academy of Medical Sciences out of Britain, and this report will wake you up, because they admit that there have been thousands of half-human, half-animals that have been created in biomedical research that have been raised, not killed as embryos, raised and experimented on, and they even go in. Now, keep in mind, the Academy of Medical Sciences is like the FDA here in the United States, right? So this is not some fringe, goofy, crazy group of people that are making wild allegations. They're calling for an international treaty to actually regulate the creation of part human, part animals for experimental purposes, and to create the language around which, when can they be created, for what purpose, what's the goal, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's three excerpts from the introduction to their report. Number one, and this is the creatures that they're saying have been created, are being created, are going to be created. Get this. Number one, extensive modification of the brain of an animal by implantation of human-derived cells, I'm quoting, which might result in altered cognitive capacity approaching human consciousness or sentience, human-like behavioral capabilities. Number two, situations where functional human gametes, we're talking here about eggs and sperm, might develop from precursor cell types in the animal, and where, listen, Steve, where fertilization between human and animal gametes might then occur, the fusing of human and animal reproductive cells. So now we're talking about the creation of a species that can actually procreate with humans. And thirdly, cellular or genetic modification that could result in animals with aspects of human-like appearance, skin type, limb or facial structure, characteristics such as speech, end quote. Those are direct quotes out of the Academy of Medical Sciences published just in July. And what's interesting is they published that report, and the very next day, one day after the Academy of Medical Sciences published their report, the Mail Online published an article that is talking about only two of the tens of thousands of laboratories, according to them, that are now involved in this research around the world, in which they admitted that 150 human-animal hybrids had been grown in United Kingdom labs. So that article, back in 2009, Scientists Want Debate on Animals with Human Genes, and people can go back and listen to our 2009 speculation about how it was already happening. Well, guess what? We were right. And so are we right now? And that's what people have to ask themselves. Are we right now about what we're speculating about the year 2012, about what David Flynn went to his grave believing? What we've discussed about the manipulation of living tissue by ancient fallen angels that led to superhuman hybridity that was made up of human and animal genetics known as Nephilim, earth-born facsimiles. Is that happening now? Fit extensions? I ask, by the way, we're doing this documentary film on transhumanism, and a current member of President Obama's Council on Bioethics, he is also a member of NASA's astrobiology team, Professor William Hurlbert of Stanford University, has agreed to be part of our film. We're going to be interviewing him in his home here in about a week and a half. And one of the questions that I've asked him is, does a human-animal hybrid, does it have a soul? Now that we know, according to the Academy of Medical Sciences out of Britain, that these splice-like creatures are being grown and raised, are being experimented on. And of course, this year's DARPA's operational budget has millions of dollars in it for editing the DNA of our soldiers on the battlefield. People that are listening to the show may have seen recent news articles where they're talking about bulletproof skin. What they don't know is that is taken directly from the transgenic goat creatures that were created that have spider genetics in them that were originally, it was one of DARPA's first successes in transgenic creation, and now they're special farms that raise these goats that have spider genetics so they can harvest spider silk out of their milk. And that spider silk it's one of the strongest materials on earth. They can make these very, very almost razor thin materials that are bulletproof. Well, what those newest articles talking about bulletproof skin are relating is how that technology is poised now to be applied to American soldiers and other soldiers on the battlefield, where their genetics are going to be altered so that they will literally have bulletproof skin. It's grown out of this transgenic research. Sounds crazy, right? Well, in 2009, it sounded crazy when we were talking about ACHM, animals containing human material, which now has been admitted and now is happening in laboratories around the world. So, Steve, we've entered into a period of time in which Matthew 24:37 is unfolding before the world's eyes. Lord, tell us, what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the aeon, the end of the age? And he said, as it was in the days of Noah. And we're doing it right now. We're doing it in laboratories around the world. And I think it's direct. I kind of lost my thought there. I think I got on a roll and got anointed and then forgot what planet I was on.
No, and I'm following with you. But the thing is, you're going for what will be the sign of thy coming, and at the days of Noah. Again, the days of Noah were so chronicled and so specific. And, we were talking earlier, Tom, about just, again, even the Egyptians, or I brought this up, that they were mummifying their dead to be brought back. So the thing that people have got to understand, and here's the point, ladies and gentlemen, Tom brought up, and I think it was Nita, Tom's wife, brought up the fact that the mark of the beast could be a mutagenic property that will change your body so you're no longer, quote, human. And Tom, obviously, and I think you even posted a couple of stories that I think the Vatican was trying to decide what happens if an alien breeds with a human. Is that entity subject to redemption? My answer now, absolutely, I feel, is absolutely not. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that reminds me of what I was going to say. That Professor Holbert, I've asked. He will be answering this question in our documentary. Do these transgenic humans, or let's say a transhuman, we start blending our genetics with animals to improve ourselves, like Professor Nick Bostrom wants to do from Oxford University, would that individual have a soul? Now, I don't know what his answer is going to be, but here's the kind of the deeper question to me, Steve. If I see, personally, my position is it wouldn't have a human soul. It might have some kind of consciousness, but it wouldn't be human. It's not human. It's not made in the image of God. God breathed the breath of life into Adam, and God set the barriers between the species. And an animal has a type of temperament or a conscience, but we would not say that an animal has the same kind of soul. It's not a habitation for the Holy Spirit in the same way that those who were created in God's image is. So if you blend a human with an animal, does that thing that you've created, does it have a soul? Now, people are going to disagree with me, and others will agree with me. In my opinion, it doesn't. Now, what does that mean? It means that it is a biological, living construct that has consciousness, but it doesn't have soul. So, in other words, it is a Nephilim. It is a construct. It is a fit extension. It is something into which those spiritual forces that Quetzalcoatl went into the underworld to preserve their seed, to save their bones according to their pantheon, so that at the end of the calendar they can be revived. These things, what are they, Steve? They are a biological living entity that looks like a human potentially, but they are something that can be something can rise up into them. Is that a part of end times prophecy, you think?
Absolutely. I think the demons, now here's what I think. I think that given the disembodied spirit, in Greek, you know this from from Bible school, diamonizomai, disembodied or demonized. The point is that when all these, Jesus bound a lot of those things, and the Gadarene demoniac begged Jesus not to send them into the abyss. Well, they ended up in there anyway. Now you've got people descending into the abyss. You've got earthquakes in the deepest abysses of the earth. And so, pun intended, we're in for the most abysmal future that anyone can imagine. And by the way, that word, the word abysmal usually means dire. Isn't it fascinating, Tom, that a lot of the world's, I think there are 11 deep trenches, 11, not 13, not 10, and that those are the areas, the abyss, which literally means a great expanse, a deep pit covered by a great expanse of water. Imagine all the dead things in Isaiah. That literally means Rephaim. The dead things are going to be reanimated. They're coming back, and that's the army that Satan believes that he's going to defeat God with. All the demons and all the giants and all the superheroes of mythology. And I think that what people have got to understand is no matter what he does. Now, here's the good news. Jesus said, behold, I give you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. And the idea of these hybrids. Now, look, I can tell you this, that the porn industry is involved in this too, because they want not just a normal woman, they want one with fur. I'm talking like, you may have even seen the artist's drawing of a woman who had, or a female sheep cross human who had fur all over her body, but she had breasts and, the plumbing. I'm not trying to be gross, but I can tell you, Tom, I sat down with a man that worked for a certain intelligence agency, and he was, by his own words, a Cold War assassin. But when he talked about the human-animal hybrids that he saw in some of these, what he called incubatoriums, where they combine alien DNA and human DNA and animal DNA, he wept like a baby. This was a tough guy, and he absolutely went into a PTSD mode with me at the airport, and I laid my hands on him. He was not a Christian, to try and calm him. But it was a supernatural agony, and I can't explain that to anybody. He wasn't just having a bad moment. And when he came and composed himself, he would start to explain this stuff, and it was just like as something would take over his body. I think obviously he was demonized, but there was such a sorrow. And when I say that, whatever was, and I'm not saying he was all human either, and I'm not telling these as ghost stories, but I'm just telling you that the bottom line is this stuff exists, and that's the same thing Phil Schneider talked about. I was with a certain person. I got to be very vague. Last week we were praying for a certain person for about 5 hours, to get some freedom and get baptized in the Holy Ghost and everything. And the person told me, who's a minister, that they're counseling a man that was involved in a deep underground base who was having, and I'm not kidding you now, how is this for timing? He was having sex with a woman who had a tail. And do you know that when he explained it to the person who told me that, it was just like the creature out of Splice.
Wow.
And he had the bona fides to prove, and I'm not going to go into detail, but where he had been, and he was terrified. Now listen to this. He produced an offspring, okay? And this is not ghost stories. People thought you and I were crazy. We'll probably get the people that still think we're crazy. But it still doesn't absolve them of their responsibility. When Jesus said, just as in the days of Noah, I don't think people understand. You and I have spent hours and hours. And by the way, this will be a 4-hour show and the equivalent of 8 normal broadcast hours. That's how important this show is tonight.
Well, and if those people think we are crazy, feel free to email me. I will send you the Academy of Medical Sciences out of Britain, the equivalent of the United States Food and Drug Administration. It is the highest level Academy of Medical Sciences, as far as I know, in Britain. And I will send you their report, Animals Containing Human Material. It was published just in July. If Steve and I are crazy, they're crazy too, because they are the ones right now who are saying this technology is there, it's happening around the world, and creatures that are part human and part animal are being created where cross-species procreation can and is occurring. So, I know it's incredible, right? We don't want to believe it. We want to believe that it has to be, surely. It has to be all speculation, and yet You look back through the research David Flynn has done, you've done. You look at Secret Life, first-hand documented accounts of UFO abductions by Professor David Jacobs. Remember him, of Temple University?
Absolutely.
And all of the research that he did, in which he came in as a non-believer. He thought it was all a psychosis, psychology. He left it saying, there is something that is going on. The ability for humans to recreate themselves, the aliens are using that ability. They want human sperm. They want eggs. That's what he concludes. Professor Jacobs, Temple University, he's combining scientific investigatory methods to analyze the accounts of all these different abductees who were claiming various things, and he comes out of it saying something is happening. It's corroborated. There is an abduction phenomenon. It's being carried out. It is a breeding program. It is resulting in the creation, he said, of alien-human hybrid offspring. And his own impression, in fact, was that, actually it was John Mack, who he was quoted, it was his impression that we were seeing the awkward joining of two species. Well, now, is that what's happening also at the Vatican? By the way, as you were talking, I'm thumbing through some of David Flynn's research off of the Watcher website. Check out what he says here on the Watcher website. Quote, the Book of Enoch explains that the sons of God descended first onto the mountain called Hermon. The rebel angels intended to thwart God's plan for the earth by destroying the descendants of Adam. Satan's goal in organizing the Nephilim human hybridization program was to pollute the bloodline that would produce Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the kinsman redeemer. But now that it is so close to the end time, Satan has orchestrated human rebel angel interaction on a grand scale. The plan is now to prevent any flesh from being saved by manipulating human genetics, whether through the guise of alien abduction or by supplying willing mortal accomplices with the proper technology. There is currently being created humanoid hybrids who are not quite human. The second wave of hybrid Nephilim creation is Satan's last effort to destroy all of the sons of Adam so that none can be redeemed when Jesus Christ returns at the end of the age, end quote. So here, again, are we talking about a guy that was so far ahead of his time? No wonder the Lord took him up into heaven. He wanted to visit with him about some of this stuff.
And I believe that with all my heart. And, I know it's tough, and boy, my heart. And you know what's interesting? I think of him, but I don't think of him as gone. I think of him just as there,
Mm-hmm. Well, anyway.
Well, I don't know where that music is coming from.
You're hearing music?
Are you there?
Yes. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. That just... weird. I was thinking of just bringing up something, and I know it's going to be weird, but it just came up on my screen. Katy Perry did an alien video, okay?
Uh-huh.
Now, that's what I was going to bring up, and all of a sudden I'm hearing that music. But Katy Perry did an alien video in which she actually morphs into a half-human. Have you ever seen that?
Yes, it's weird and spooky and demonic.
But it's weird, spooky, and demonic. But understand, here's the critical thing. You can go on YouTube, and she talks about selling her soul to the devil, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But look at this. Look at the occult transition in both video games and music. We only got 13 minutes. I just want you to respond to this. Doesn't it seem interesting that you cannot, for not you, but that they cannot get away from broadcasting their intentions in such an explicit way? I mean, Tom, we're talking about basically, genetic mutations. We're talking about human, I won't even tell people where to go because it's disgusting, but now there are basically videos on YouTube of people sitting around and eating human cadavers and partying around just like V. Okay, I'm saying this, ladies and gentlemen, we get a lot of flack. I get a lot of flack when I said these things coming back to serve mankind. It literally was a recipe book on the Twilight Zone. But what's going to be interesting, Tom, is those things that were reanimated. Can you imagine all of the, if you will, the cannibal tribes and all those things, the giant tribes, or the Karnakawa, a very famous tribe in southern Texas of giants? Can you imagine what happens when they all come back and they're out of a form of stasis? I'm not trying to be weird, but man, these things are going to be hungry. And so
well, that's and actually that's what the ancient records says happened. They begin consuming one another. They not only consumed animals and plants, they consumed people and blood. And it's interesting that you bring up that video because the media, popular media, seems to be playing a very significant role in preparing this generation to accept what is coming. There was a recent poll that said that 75%, now that's a huge number, that's 75% of the world's population, under the age of 21 have had their worldview more influenced by the teachings of George Lucas's Star Wars movies than they have by Christian churches. Now, follow that train of thought through, because I was interviewed by New Man magazine a couple of years back in an article that I wrote at the time when the film came out on the Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And in that film, I pointed out several things. First of all, that the Jedi, and the reason I'm making this point is you brought up popular media, and what is popular?
No, I understand.
Yeah. So the central personalities in that film, the Jedi, the heroes of the film, they're nearly exact duplicates of what's known as the New Age Ascended Masters theology. Secondly, those Jedi are in tune with the Force, according to the film. And, of course, Daniel says in Daniel 11, I think 38, that the Antichrist will be a worshiper of the God of forces. Thirdly, the Jedi, in the Phantom Menace, they're looking for a prophesied Redeemer who's going to bring balance to the Force. And guess what? When their Jedi Savior comes, he's born of a virgin. But his name is Anakin, which in Hebrew means the sons of Anak, and refers to the Nephilim of the Old Testament.
Absolutely.
Anakin's offspring, the master trainer, I should say, I forget what the actor's name is, but he's a man by the name of Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon is a branch of Taoism that purports to teach how to use the universal energies that supposedly exist in and all around us, probably those energies that the Nephilim used to elevate those stones you were talking about. The second part of his name is Jinn, which is, of course, Muslim for the demons that inhabit the air, the genies, right?
Yep.
Now, this Qui-Gon Jinn in the film, he believes that Anakin is the prophesied redeemer of mankind, and he proclaims that belief in a way that's almost identical to what John the Baptist did of Jesus. But then just a little bit later in that film, there is a scene where Anakin stands before the Jedi Council, just like Jesus did before the temple priests, and we hear words in the film that are almost an exact quotation from Matthew 11, which says, "Are you the one that is to come, or shall we look for another?" Anyway, those comparisons in that they're shocking, but they lead to a more powerful point that's made in the film, that just as Jesus redeemed us through his blood, midichlorians in Anakin's blood are unlike anything seen in a human before, and so they mark him as special. They mark him as the Redeemer in the film. But what's disturbing in the film's message is this, that unlike Jesus, who never turned to the dark side when he was tempted, Anakin, according to the trilogy of films, he gives into the powers of darkness for most of his life. And only at the end, he tries to repent. And the message to these under 21-year-olds, 75% of whom have been more influenced, according to this Harris poll, by the Star Wars movies than they have by churches. The message is that the true Savior is ultimately going to be revealed as Anakin Skywalker. Anakin, the offspring of the Anak, the son of Anak, Darth Vader, Lucifer, the one that the world always has perceived as being evil, but who ultimately is going to become man's Savior in the end. this could be a gigantic setup for the coming not only of extraterrestrials, but the acceptance of an antichrist. Now, you and me, Steve, we look at that and we think, oh, so what, who cares? What, according to these recent polls, 75% of this generation do care. They've been more influenced by those films than guys like me and you and preachers of the gospel. So, so what does that portend? I realize we're out of time, we have to quit, but the point is, it is a setup. The media is complicit. They are, or they are blindly and unknowingly being led by satanic forces, the same spiritual forces that are behind thousands of years of occultic societies, from the Maya to the Aztec to Malachi O'Morgare, to Jewish priests who rejected Jesus Christ as Messiah and therefore gave themselves over to deceptive spirits in the Zohar. All of these sources that have been looking forward to an event horizon, the year 2012, in which the false prophet, the Antichrist, and the heavens are going to be filled with the return of a dragon spirit that has the power of air, and I can't even say his name now, but Bakteku, the spirit of the underworld of the Maya, arising, bringing with it these, the seed that's going to fulfill the Kume Sibyl's prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States. I'll tell you what, I'd like a mathematician listening to this show to just take a fragment of what we've talked about tonight and tell me what are the mathematical probabilities that all of these societies over thousands of years, most of whom we have no evidence that in ancient times they didn't have the internet, they didn't have no method for communicating with one another, they were separated by time and distance, hundreds of years, in some cases thousands of years, and by sea mileage, no records that they met one another and shared their stories. What is the mathematical probability that all these societies, that this confluence, this concatenation of events is unfolding, and now Petrus Romanus, the final prophecy on a 900-year-old Catholic prophecy telling us that the false prophet is going to arise in the year 2012 and help give rise to the Antichrist, who the Jews in the Zohar say would arrive in September of 2012. Note that that's just before the election here in the United States. Anyway, take all of that information, take tonight's show, decipher it down into lines and items, and somebody give me what is the mathematical probability that all of that is just chance, because I'll bet you anything it's in the order of millions to one. There's something very weird, very strange, occultic, demonic that is unfolding in the year 2012, and Steve Quayle and I are here trying to awake the world to the reality that something is going on, and it very much smacks of the fulfillment of end times biblical prophecy.
Tom, Steve, we're at the 2-minute warning. 1 minute each for you to give out your contact information. Go.
Well, my contact information is stevequayle.com. My website, my books are only available there. Tom, what you're talking about with the Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas, I deal with all that. My book, Angel Wars, is the complete, if you will, integration of everything I know up to this date that I could put in there that would be valuable. The transhumanism, the singularity, all those things that Tom and I have talked about. And ladies and gentlemen, remember, we have to be the bow of the icebreaker to be able to get you into areas that would normally be frozen out or closed off to you. So we take a lot of the heat, but we got to let you know we're going on ahead so that you can follow. And we're bringing you into the promises of the living God, His presence, His protection, His purpose, His plan, and ultimately His praise, that we might enjoy God forever, love Him, praise Him, and worship Him. And again, my website is Steve Quayle, SteveQuayle.com. Tom, thank you so much.
Tom,
hey, and on Steve Quayle's website, you'll see an ad there that says get a library for free. Click on that. You can go there. You can read all about how on Tuesday, April the 24th, we are going to be giving a fantastic library. It's going to have the Jesuit Codex book we talked about tonight. It's going to have lectures on the Revelation from hundreds of years ago, numerous other libraries, but you can get it from Steve Quayle. You can click on the ad there at his website.
Your website, RaiderNewsUpdate.com.
Yeah, RaidersNewsUpdate.com.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Steve, for coming on tonight. This is episode 622. It'll be up in the archives in about 10 minutes. Go to SteveQuayle.com and RaidersNewsUpdate.com. Get a copy of Petrus Romanus.